So we're going to start by handing over to Stuart Galloway, who is, as you can see, going to be speaking to us about Jacob Leon Rubinstein.
Yes.
So hand over to you. If you can't, any issue with the sounds, please unmute yourself and let me know, and I'll monitor that. But Stuart, over to yourself.
Okay, right. Well, good afternoon, folks. I want to try and get across this afternoon a little bit about the character of Rubinstein and a little bit about what was going on during his life as well. So the first photographs I've got up here are fairly well-known ones, I suppose the most well-known. We've got Jack Beer's photo and Bob Jackson's photo there. Both of them were put in for Pulitzer Prizes, but it was Bob Jackson's that got it. He was actually able to hear that famous expletive, "You son of a bitch," just as he pulled the trigger, so he got it. The Warren Commission's view, well, just reading through this, nut or conspirator, I think we can guess exactly. The Commission's conclusion was in place before the Commission had even been established. Oswald was guilty and had acted alone, so it was necessary for the Commission to show that Jack Ruby had also acted alone. The Commission believes that the evidence does not establish a significant link between Ruby and organised crime. Both state and federal officials have indicated that Ruby was not affiliated with organised criminal activity, and numerous persons have reported that Ruby was not connected with such activity. So there we have dear old Earl Warren, and they actually said at the end, the final statements were, the Commission has found no evidence that either Lee Harvey Oswald or Jack Ruby was part of any conspiracy, domestic or foreign, to assassinate President Kennedy. But they did have a few concerns, mainly the fact that Ruby may have had mafia connections, but they denied it completely at the end. There were connections with the DPD, which of course they completely ignored. The help in access to the DPD headquarters apparently did worry the Commission. Ruby's connection with organised crime, and the fact that they had no investigative staff of their own at all. They relied entirely on the FBI. So we had a situation where Johnson had commissioned the report on the assassination from Hoover. 2 weeks later, the FBI produced a 500-page report claiming that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole assassin and that there was no evidence of a conspiracy. The report was then passed to the Warren Commission, so rather than conduct its own independent investigation, the Commission relied almost entirely on the FBI report. As Posner would later say, case closed. They might all have just packed up and gone home at that point. So a little bit about Ruby growing up. We've got a sort of across his early life, and I'm going to have a bit of a voiceover on this. He was born in Chicago on 25th of March 1911, where he grew up amongst mobsters from an early age. He was born Jacob Leon Rubinstein and lived in the Maxwell Street area of Chicago. The son of Joseph Rubinstein, who was a carpenter, and Fanny Turek Rakowski, both Polish-born Orthodox Jews from Sokola. While he was growing up, his parents were often violent towards each other and frequently separated. Ruby's mother was eventually committed to a mental hospital. His troubled childhood and adolescence were marked by recorded juvenile delinquency, with extended time being spent in foster homes. Jack's sister, Marion, not Marion Rubinstein, he had about 8 siblings, observed that their mother has never been any kind of a housekeeper, was careless with money, and never took much interest in the children's welfare. She was selfish, jealous, disagreeable, and never cared to do anything in the home but lie around and sleep. So it sounds as if she was a bit of a waste of space. At age 11 in 1922, Jack was arrested for truancy. He eventually skipped school so often that he had to spend time at the Institute for Juvenile Research, which still exists to this day in the University of Chicago. Jack's father, Joseph, was a carpenter. He was a violent man and was frequently arrested for assault and battery charges. Poor Jack didn't have much of a start in life. He never graduated from high school and spent years working in odd jobs. He was a sports fanatic from a very early age. He later acted as a business agent for a local refuse collectors union that later became part of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Well, we all remember who headed that up a little bit later on. So Jack could not be classed as any sort of academic, but he certainly achieved marks at the University of Life Skills. From an early childhood, Ruby was nicknamed Sparky by those who knew him. His sister, Eva Grant, said that he acquired the nickname because he resembled a slow-moving horse named Sparkplug, or Sparky, that appeared in a comic strip at the time. Other accounts say that the name was given because of his quick temper, which I think is probably more likely. Frank Nitti, as I've mentioned there, that he worked for, was a gangster in Chicago, one of Al Capone's top henchmen, and actually was involved with alcohol smuggling and distribution. Al Capone himself, of course, everybody knows him, he's the most famous mafia, I suppose, of all times. He ran the Chicago outfit. Johnny Handsome Johnny Roselli, they called him. He was recruited by the CIA, of course, and worked down in JM Wave. And he later admitted that Ruby had been ordered to take out Oswald to prevent the mafia's involvement in the assassination coming to light. Jack was drafted into the services in '43, and he had an honourable record and was discharged as a private first class. He moved to Dallas in '47 and later went on to manage various nightclubs, strip clubs and dance halls. Police Lieutenant Elmo Cunningham, who was in the Texas Theatre when Oswald was arrested, remembers Jack running a dance hall for his sister on South Irving Street. He had to borrow money to buy the carousel. He developed close ties to many Dallas police officers who frequented his nightclubs, where he provided them with free drinks, prostitutes, and other favours possibly associated with drugs. His business ventures generally remained unsuccessful, and during the time of the assassination, he was heavily in debt. He apparently was somewhat eccentric and unstable in behaviour. He sometimes took his shirt or other clothes off in social gatherings and then either hit his chest like a gorilla or rolled around the floor. He was described by those who knew him as a crook, totally unpredictable, a psycho, and suffering from some form of disturbance. However, it's interesting to note that in '46, Jack Ruby was a US government informant and police-protected trafficker in narcotics. His vice activities put him in touch with top Texas oilmen and politicians. This is fairly early on that he was mixing with these guys. He gave evidence to the Kiefer Committee in 1950, and exchange the FBI eased up on their investigations into organised crime in Dallas. In '59, he reportedly visited Santos Traficante in a Cuban prison. So to me, this indicates that he was heavily involved with the mafia, unlike what the commission said. There's Nitti and there's old Roselli. And Jack actually loved animals. He loved his dogs, as you know. That's him with cats and dogs there. And a fairly young man in the USAF. So Chicago, just a little bit about Chicago in 1911, the year of his birth. We've got some photographs there. This is exactly 1911, Chicago State Street. Notice the electric trams beginning, and we've got actually some cars down in that part of Dearborn. This is in 1913. And that is the police headquarters in 1928, which is probably about the time that dear old Jack would have been visiting it on fairly regularly. I think this young lady might have been a bit concerned about the situation in Chicago at the time, so I'm sure they've cleaned up since. In fact, they've got a lovely beach. I saw a picture of their beach. It is superb, actually. And the Chicago Motor Show was in 1911. We've got there the Locomobile Company of America exhibit, which is showing the car actually in its chassis form, which was quite innovative. and this was Marshall Field Trucks, and this was the Goodyear exhibit. Now, considering this is a stand, I think in modern day exhibitions, I think those people planning would have been a bit distraught at that. They also had a Chicago air meeting, and there was a major a guy by the name of Lincoln Beachy set a world record of 11,642 feet, which caused quite a stir in those days. But sadly, 2 flyers lost their lives. These 2 guys, the wings on the biplane flown by William Badger collapsed when he tried to pull out of a dive too late, and Sanquhar Johnstone crashed into Lake Michigan after his engines failed. Anyway, back to Jack and his girls. We've got a picture there, some of them quite famous. The tall lady in the white short dress standing in front of Ruby is Roscoe White's wife, Geneva. She worked for a few months at the Carousel Club, and Geneva claimed that she heard her husband and Jack plotting the assassination of JFK. Roscoe's son Ricky also accuses his father of shooting the president and J.D. Tippit. He claimed he got the information from his father's diary, but there is some doubt, of course, that exists in the validity of that theory. Geneva later stated that she was given electric shock treatment in an attempt to make her forget what she knew about the assassination, and apparently there is documentation to prove that is a fact. Ruby always said that his clubs were not centres of prostitution, but rather burlesque experiences that could be enjoyed by all, including DPD police officers, I'm sure, and this allowed him to sail close to the wind very often without fear of prosecution. Now, did Jack Ruby know Lee Harvey Oswald? Now, unfortunately, I haven't got time, and I would bore you silly if I went through all these, but it is staggering the number of people who I found in reading documents and books as to recognise Ruby with Oswald, and I'll just put these up, and I'm going to comment on a few only. Robert Patterson, let's go to Karen Bennett, who was Karen Bennett Carlin, who was Little Lynn, and Kathy Kay. They both worked at the Carousel and saw Lee Harvey Oswald on several occasions, on one occasion talking to Ruby. Karen Carlin was, you remember, the lady to whom Ruby sent $25 for her rent from the Western Union office in Dallas just before the infamous shooting of Oswald. Karen Carlin, in her statement to the FBI, stated that in her telephone call to Ruby on the 24th of November, requesting the money, she asked him whether the Carousel was going to open Sunday night. He became upset, pointing out that they had to show proper respect towards the deceased president. She stated that during her telephone conversation he sounded vague and preoccupied. Anyway, after the assassination, she mysteriously disappeared, probably because she was very scared, and eventually turned up on the lists of mysterious deaths. She was apparently murdered by gunfire in a Houston hotel. However, John Davis, who wrote books on the Mafia and the Kennedys, some of you may have read Mafia Kingfish, for instance, reports that in October 1992, Karen Carlin came back from the dead. She contacted Gary Shaw, director of the JFK Assassination Center in Dallas, almost 30 years after having lived under an assumed identity, and told him she knew of a conspiracy to kill Lee Harvey Oswald. Apparently, Ruby had told her to phone him Sunday morning, and that an hour later he would telegraph her $25 just before shooting Oswald. He would then use this arrangement to establish an alibi to justify his shooting Oswald as an impulsive act of revenge because he happened to be in the area of the Western Union office. So it seems that Ruby had definitely planned his attack beforehand. Now, Janet Mole from Forto, who was Jada, who was actually one of Ruby's favourites, she acted very suspiciously on the day of the assassination. At 12 noon, before the assassination, when employees of the Texas School Book Depository and others were lining up on the street to watch the presidential motorcade, Jada was in a hurry to leave Dallas. Whilst driving down Lemon Avenue, she struck a pedestrian named Charles Barnes as he was crossing the road. Both were taken to a local clinic where Barnes was examined and x-rayed for possible injuries. Meanwhile, Jada was nearly hysterical and repeatedly cursed at Barnes. After she calmed down, she used the telephone to call a man who arrived within a few minutes in another Cadillac. She had been interviewed by security. They asked her whether they could get in touch with her at the carousel. No, she replied sharply, and anyway, the carousel would not be opening this evening. She also stated that she was in a hurry to get to New Orleans. Barnes thought that the carousel closing was very unusual. Normally it would have been packed on a Friday night. Suspicions were enhanced after the shooting of Kennedy came through, so security reported the situation to the FBI. When the FBI tried to locate Jada in New Orleans, they checked the address on her driving license and the one in the phone book, and she could not be traced. So the point is here, how did Jada know, half an hour before the assassination, that Jack Ruby would not be opening the Carousel Club? Why was she desperate to leave Dallas? Beverly Oliver, babushka lady, she worked for the Colony Club next door to the Carousel, which she visited on numerous occasions. She remembered having coffee with Ruby, who introduced her to Lee Harvey Oswald and said, "I'd like you to meet my friend Oswald, who works for the CIA." She also claimed that she photographed the motorcade and the film was confiscated by some official men soon afterwards, and this film has never been returned to her. Right, Wally Weston. No, I'll miss out Wally Weston, but go to Sherry Angel, whose real name was Bobby Lou Messerol. She was interviewed by our very own Ian Briggs. In part of the interview with Ian, Sherry repeated almost word for word what John Armstrong tells us about the attack by Lee Harvey Oswald on Wally Weston. Wally Weston had been attacked by Oswald. He jumped up on the stage and said, "You're a communist, aren't you?" At which point Ruby intervened and chucked Oswald out of the Carousel Club. This was confirmed by Sherry. And she also stated that she had seen Lee Harvey Oswald in the Carousel Club on several other occasions. I did read later on that she was reported by AP News in May 1988 that Bobby Lou Messerol, Sherry Angel, had become a minister as she was anxious to atone for her past life and help those who were caught up in prostitution and drugs. At the ceremony, the officiating minister said that over 30 years Sherry had gone from taking off the cloth to donning the cloth, which is rather droll. And Mary Lawrence, the restaurant, she was head waitress at the Lucas B&B restaurant, and you can see the sign there at the bottom. I don't know why they've kept it. That's a picture from 2008. The building's well gone, but that still stands. The restaurant was cited only 2 doors from the Vegas Club, and she had known Jack Ruby for over 8 years. At 2:15 a.m. on the morning of 22nd of November, Oswald entered the restaurant and told Mary and the night cashier that he was waiting for Jack Ruby. A short while later, Ruby entered the cafe, sat at a table, and was soon joined by Oswald. The two men sat for over an hour and then got up and left. A week or so after the assassination on the 3rd of December, Mary received a phone call from an unknown man who said, "If you don't want to die, you'd better get out of town." And when subsequently questioned by the Dallas police, Mary stuck to her guns and reported that what she had seen. When Mary told the FBI Ruby and Oswald only 10 hours before the assassination, she was totally ignored and never questioned or interviewed by the Warren Commission. Now, the last one, which I will now bring up, was Judith Vary Baker. And I don't know whether many of you have read her book. It actually reads very well. It's quite controversial. It reads more like a novel. But knowing her background, the tale that she sells doesn't seem totally unbelievable. Anyway, in chapter 12, entitled Sparky, she relates that she and Lee had been invited to Dave's to meet an important out-of-town guest. Dave turns out to be David Ferry. As they got to Dave's place, they found him sitting quietly in a chair, reading a breviary whilst wearing priest's vestments. He apparently had just offered up mass in memory of his parents. David Ferry, of course, had early in his life studied at seminary, but of course never became a priest. Conversation turned to animals, and Judith mentioned her dog named Sparky, who had a bladder problem and used to pee on the bed. Well, the illustrious visitor, who was also called Sparky, turned out to be Jack Ruby. By the way, in the book, Judith never mentioned Dave's surname or Sparky's surname in her account. One is led to the obvious conclusion. Sparky turns up in Marcello's car, although Carlos does not come into the apartment. The afternoon includes Judith doing backflips to show how supple she is, and Sparky walking around the apartment on his hands to show how powerful and fit he is. Surreal is not really the word for it. But does Sparky really know Lee? Well, let me quote Sparky from that chapter in one of the conversations recounted by Judith. And Sparky says, "I thought you understood my jokes by now, Lee." Sparky mused, "You've known me long enough." Turning to me, that's Judith, Sparky said, "I've known Lee ever since he was a little boy." Sparky explained that when he was first getting up to Marcello's helper in Dallas, he went to some family parties in New Orleans and met Lee's aunt, mother and father, who of course was Dutch Moet. He remembered playing with the other children at these gatherings. So Jack, I think, seems to have known, according to her, for many years. And just as an adjunct to this, several high-ranking telephone people hurried to the police shortly after Oswald had been shot with phone company records showing that Oswald and Ruby definitely knew each other. At Dallas Police Department headquarters, they were told to go home and forget it. All the men were then hastily transferred out of Dallas. There's Caroline before she disappeared, and there's a newspaper cutting which was dated the July 18th, 1976, which shows Walter Wally Weston, who was a good friend of Jack and MC at his club, and he's clearly stating that Jack Ruby and Lee Oswald knew each other. There's Jada. Now there's the babushka lady standing up there. I put this in, nothing to do with Ruby, but I'm told that the lady down the bottom there, circled with a red circle, is the babushka lady, but I cannot see how that could be if you look at the position of the presidential car. The other thing is, the babushka lady said that she'd filmed the motorcade, but this was denied by a lot of people. But if you look at that picture, she seems to have a camera up to her face there, and this is really just at the point that the fatal shot came through. So if that film had survived and she got the film back, that really would have told something, I think. Rose Sheremy. I'm concentrating a bit on this young lady because she definitely comes into the plot quite a bit. Just come up with, she was born in 1923. She endured a tragic childhood, another abuser, abused by her father, became a prostitute and an addiction to heroin and alcohol. She worked for Ruby, probably first person to link him to Oswald. According to the FBI files and police, she had over 35 aliases. She was found in the road, battered and bruised and disorientated just before the assassination. She'd apparently been hit by a car while hitchhiking. She was taken to Musa Hospital and treated for abrasions, and she admitted to being a drug courier for Jack Ruby, and she moved to East Louisiana State Hospital, and I'll give a voiceover on this. And she told Froude, who was the policeman who took her, and the doctors, that JFK was to be killed the following day. So how did this all come about? Well, on the evening of the 20th of November, she was found lying on Highway 190 near Eunice. She had been travelling from Florida to Dallas, and two men who she said resembled Italians. They had stopped at a lounge called the Silver Slipper, a house of prostitution. Now, we had a fantastic talk from Dr. Michael McCardes, who is Rose's son, and he gave a talk to us some months ago, and he confirmed that Rose would have had drugs and prostitution business to conduct at that place, and that she had become very drunk that evening. He also confirmed that she would have had, amongst others, worked for Jack Ruby and taken orders from him and local mob officials. Jeremy had also worked at the Carousel Club at one stage. Dr. McCardes believes that she was probably not thrown from a car, but had more likely been ejected from the lounge for being very drunk and disorderly, and was accidentally knocked down as she wandered down the highway in a drunken stupor. Anyway, the driver, Frank Odom, took her to Musa Hospital, where she was treated for minor abrasions, and the police were called, and she was found to be extremely drunk and excitable. So Lieutenant Francis Froude arrived and took her to Eunice City Jail. Again, because of her condition and extreme agitation, she was committed to East Louisiana State Hospital in Jackson. Froude accompanied her in the ambulance, and during the 2-hour trip, she told her tale about how she had been thrown out of the Silver Slipper and tried hitchhiking. Incidentally, the hospital was where Lee Harvey Oswald had applied for a job only 3 months earlier. It was in the hospital that Rose reported she had learned that JFK was to be murdered the following day in Dallas, and Jack Ruby was involved in the plot. Nobody took any notice of her, but when the president's trip to Dallas was later mentioned in a news broadcast, she repeated again that this is where it is going to happen. And of course it duly happened, as she predicted, much to the concern of the hospital staff. Anyway, Froude drove to Jackson to interview Rose further and realised that her story of picking up her little boy in Dallas and then $8,000 with which she was to pay for a shipment of drugs arriving in Houston was true. After reporting the situation to various county and federal authorities, the case was simply dropped. There's much more to this story. In fact, Rose Sherman was murdered in September '65, supposedly in a road traffic accident, but she was actually shot in the head. Incidentally, the other two men originally with Rose at the Silver Slipper were Sergio Araca Smith and Emilio Santana, who were almost certainly involved in the assassination. Remember the plans of the Dealey Plaza sewer system found in Smith's apartment. Dr. McCardes stated in the interview that he has original documentation to prove the validity of this account. He has researched his mother's life extensively for many years and visited many of the places she visited, along with records at the hospitals. My main point here is that we have another incident of Jack Ruby being accused of heavy involvement with the assassination and Oswald. Shermy also stated that she believed Oswald and Ruby were bedmates. And that was from a lot of that is in Dr. McCarthy's book, Gathering Fallen Petals, which is well worth a read. Now, Dorothy Kilgallen. Dorothy was born in 1913, and in March she started covering the trial of Ruby, and in fact she attended every day. She was probably the first journalist to raise critical questions about the assassination and the government cover-up. She printed story after story of witnesses who were threatened by the DPD or FBI. And she got permission through Joe Tonnehill, which is Jack's lawyer, and the judge to allow her to interview Ruby during a noon recess in the trial. The meeting took place, but she was never to report officially all that Jack revealed to her. As questions deepened about JFK's murder, she contacted Mark Lane and began publishing fruits of her investigation in her newspaper. She mentioned to Mark Lane that they would have to be very careful because intelligence agencies would be monitoring them, However, she pressed on, making research trips to New Orleans and back to Dallas. She stated, "If this is the last thing I do, I am going to break this case." Phil Nelson, in his book about LBJ as the mastermind of the assassination, refers to the high-risk affairs of both the Kennedy brothers with the Hollywood star Marilyn Monroe, was also part of the investigative work that Dorothy Kilgallen undertook. She had published references to Marilyn Monroe's lover, who she wrote was a handsome gentleman who is bigger name than Joe DiMaggio in his heyday. On the 1st of August 1962, 3 days before Marilyn Monroe died, Dorothy had even called Bobby Kennedy at the Justice Department to try to verify the rumours. Being a well-known TV personality herself, did this trigger some deadly event which culminated in the death of Monroe, Kennedy, and ultimately her? She published some of Ruby's testimony to the WC, which she shouldn't have got hold of, but she managed, and the FBI tried to find out the source. On the 21st of August 1964, she pointed out in a newspaper article that the FBI would have more profitably employed investigation the facts of the case rather than how she obtained them. In the last column that she would ever write, she said, "This story isn't going to die as long as there's a real reporter alive, and there are a lot of them." She died on the 8th of November 1965. The death certificate stated she died from acute ethanol and barbiturate intoxication, circumstances undetermined. However, she neither drank nor took drugs. So that brings us on to Mrs. Earl E.T. Smith, Florence Pritchett. When I first started reading about Kilgallen, I thought that her friend, which she passed some documentation to, was just round the corner and a lady who could be trusted. However, this lady turns out to be quite a famous character. Florence Pritchett, or Mrs. E.T. Smith, Earl Smith. She was a fashion editor and TV panellist, similar to Dorothy. Her second husband was ambassador to Cuba. Florence first met Jack Kennedy in 1944, and they spent a lot of time together. The FBI files indicate that in the late 50s, JFK paid more than a dozen visits to Cuba in order to meet Florence. Following the death of Kilgallen, Florence, a close friend, may have acquired these notes and papers concerning the assassination, but 2 days later, Florence was found in her home dead from a cerebral hemorrhage. Some say that she took her own life, but her son said that she had been suffering from leukemia. Others say, of course, that she may well have been assassinated. However, it was possible that Dorothy's husband, who was Richard Colmer, had the papers and destroyed, taking any secrets to the grave with him. He apparently committed suicide in January 1971. And in 1975, the FBI was still calling on Dorothy's family, trying to ferret out any assassination papers that she may have stashed away somewhere. Moving on then, the Pearl Street mob. You can see a little connection there between Carlos Marcello, Joseph Francis Chiavello, and Joe Campisi, and his brother Sam, and a guy who I'd never heard of was Chicken Louie Fernando. Now the phrase was actually coined by Mark North in his book Betrayal in Dallas. North refers to a Chiavello crime family like this because the first narcotics raid on the Dallas Mafia originated in the Pearl Street Market District. So let's have a look at these guys. Chicken Louie. He was a member of the Dallas crime family. Louis was born in 1918 in Shreva, Louisiana. He was part of the Chiavello mob's bookmaking operation and was a criminal associate and close friend of Jack Ruby. After the death of their father, he and his brother set up the Texas Poultry and Egg Company, so one can see how he got his nickname. Louis was accidentally shot by his girlfriend on the 17th of July 1956. She turned up in his office saying that she would shoot herself if he did not marry her because she was pregnant. In the struggle that ensued, Louis was shot dead. However, it was Chicken Louie that actually introduced Jack Ruby into the Dallas Mafia organisation. Sam Campisi was Joe's brother and co-owner of the Egyptian Lounge, a restaurant that they bought in the late 50s. Sam was a very close friend of Jack Ruby. After Jack's arrest for shooting Oswald, the first person that he asked to visit him in jail was Joe Campisi. Joe and his wife duly visited on the 30th of November, and in fact it is on record that Campisi regularly visited in jail. Mark North believes that John Kennedy was assassinated by mafia contract killers hired by Louisiana mob boss Carlos Marcello. Long-time local district attorney Henry Wade and LBJ Cromie, who would have sole jurisdiction over the prosecution of those responsible, had been corrupted by the local Chivello crime family. Lyndon Johnson, whilst a US senator during the 1950s, had accepted bribes from the same mobsters so that they could avoid deportation. In late '61, both Robert and John Kennedy, who both hated LBJ, initiated a covert organised crime task force investigating the Chivello mob in Dallas. The Carousel Club was part of the investigation because of the suspicions over Jack Ruby's activism. Johnson, through Wade and local federal officials he had placed in power, learned of the plan and cooperated with the Chivello mob to have JFK killed. Johnson did this in part because he had power to control and subsequent federal investigation via FBI Director Hoover, who of course wanted JFK out of the way as well. Johnson wanted JFK out of the way because of Billy Solestes, Malcolm Wallace and Bobby Baker scandals, which of course we know a little about. Names that could have brought him down and placed him in jail for a long time. So after the assassination and after Johnson got to power, everything was stopped. The prosecution of the Dallas Mafia was stopped. Joe Chivello was reportedly very friendly with Dallas Police Department Sergeant Patrick Dean, who was one of those responsible for security when Ruby entered the police department to shoot Oswald. So there we have a certain Mr. Johnson. What was his role in the assassination? We'll have a look at that later on. But Ruby's fingers were in every pie at the time of the assassination and before. Just going through those. He was a close acquaintance and interface with the DPD and the Mafia, as we've said. He had ties to all three of those cities, principally through the Mafia, and some people believe that he would have had a principal role to play in each of the plots, ensuring that the patsy and the gunman were set up and delivered. And he may have delivered the shooter and a rifle to the grassy knoll before the Dallas assassination. Some believe that he may have had some part in spotting for the shooters. Photographed in front of the TSPD immediately after the assassination, reportedly seen sitting in the Texas Theatre during the arrest of Oswald. Jim Mars in Crossfire mentions this. He may have delivered the magic bullet, Exhibit C399, to the stretcher at Parkland Hospital. He was certainly seen there. Was he at the Dallas Morning News at the time he stated? He was missing for some time. Seen in the halls of the DPD headquarters on several occasions after Oswald's arrest. NBC shows that Ruby actually impersonated a newspaper reporter during a press conference in order to get in. He met DPD patrolman Harry Olson and Kathy Kay in downtown Dallas, not far from Plaza, on 2 a.m. on Sunday morning. And Ruby was definitely seen to be stalking Oswald throughout the weekend. I think he would have been arranging also with the DPD officer Blackie Harrison concerning the transfer of Oswald, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Right. Ruby stated that he was in the Dallas Morning News working on an advert for his club from 11 a.m. until well after the assassination had taken place. However, a reporter told the FBI that Ruby was missing for a period of about half an hour before being seen in the office of the assassination. Was his visit to the newspaper office designed to give him an alibi for what he was doing in Dealey Plaza? Ruby admitted to carrying a gun around during the press conferences he may well have been trying to shoot Oswald earlier. So, moving on, we have an automobile which goes back some time. It was found, a sale document was found by Mrs. Anne Maybury Bergfield Finance Company, and she found a bill of sale in her company records. Who was the seller of this car? The seller was Jack Ruby, and who was the buyer? The buyer was Lee Harvey Oswald. And what was the cost? The cost was a carton of cigarettes. Apparently one can't give something away like a car in Texas. A gratuity at least must be involved. So this carton of cigarettes apparently sealed the deal between Ruby and Oswald. That is a car very similar, same year, and it's a Ford Edsel 58. And afterwards, Anne contacted the FBI, who arrived at her office and looked at the bill of sale for the above transaction and said, "So what? It is inconsequential," handed the document back to her and departed, and refiled it. The current value of this car is $15,000, which would make it a very expensive carton of cigarettes. This is Louis Stokes, who was on the HSCA, and there's a document which shows that the sale took place, let me just say, it was through Louis, it was directed to Lewis, his name is actually Louis, and it's bringing his attention to the fact that this sale of this car had taken place. So this was genuinely, and this was actually a document that Bart kindly sent to me. I was able to trace the sale. This car here is interesting, nothing to do with Ruby, but that was Lee Harvey Oswald's car, sold on eBay in 2015. The car is a Chevrolet Bel Air. It was advertised 6 years ago as the actual vehicle that Lee Harvey Oswald used to travel from New Orleans to Dallas in October '63. Some people have testified that Oswald also spent time driving this car around Dallas. It was apparently owned by Ruth Payne, so strictly it wasn't Oswald's car, but her testimony found in the Warren Commission report detailed Oswald's involvement with this vehicle, but I cannot find any evidence in her testimony that she said that Oswald could drive. Remember though that Captain Westbrook did actually see a driving licence in Lee Harvey Oswald's name. This is interesting, a taxi ride to San Francisco. Again, this is a document directed from the FBI, and it's a letter, to the FBI. It's directed to FBI Director and Special Agent in Charge in Dallas, dated the 26th of November '63. If you look carefully, Tulsa's name is also in the distribution list. I've adapted the content of this document because it's full of words like pause and stop, and so I want to get across to you just the basics of what it says. The letter relates to a report given to the FBI by a San Francisco taxi driver, Aubrey de Peloton. Aubrey states that he picked up a fare, a white male, aged about 45, who was short and stocky. He picked him up at the Greyhound bus depot, 7th and Mission Street, at about 11 p.m. on Wednesday the 20th of November. The fare sat in the front seat of the taxi and asked to go to Eddy and Jones Streets, and then changed his request to Ellis and Jones. The fare then asked Aubrey, "How do you like President Kennedy?" followed by some general conversation. The fare then stated, "My name is Jack Ruby." He then stated that he was going back to Dallas and was a nightclub owner in Texas. The fare then said, "You will read about me. My name is Jack Ruby." He repeated this several times. He then said he was either going to shoot or kill somebody, and as if Aubrey was not paying enough attention to him, the fare asked, "What's my name?" Aubrey replied, "Jack Ruby. That's what you've been saying." Anyway, the fare left the taxi at the corner of Ellis and Jones Streets, paid his fare and walked away, never to be seen by Peloton again. So did Ruby know beforehand that he was going to have to take part in the assassination in some form or other? Was it actually Ruby, or was it somebody else impersonating him to set him up somehow, just like the Oswald lookalikes? I did manage to track down a bit about Aubrey de Peloton. He indeed was a taxi driver. There's his grave, well, it's not his gravestone, it's actually his wife's gravestone. His name's been engraved on it. And I can only say that he had lived in San Francisco and was married to a lady by the name of Eugenia. Now Jack had previously lived in San Francisco, and I believe one of his lawyers lived there as well, so perhaps he was visiting him. Another car 107. 10th of April 63, the day of the Walker shooting, Ruby places a call from the Carousel Club to a Clarence Rector. Clarence was an automobile transporter in Sulphur Springs. A week later, 17th of April, the DPD sold 107 to used car dealer Elvis Blount. Now Elvis Blount also lived in Sulphur Springs. So what car did Erlene Roberts see outside her house? Because she eventually said it wasn't 106, if you remember. She thought they mentioned 127 in her testimony, then it was 106, but she said no, it was 107. The FBI tried unsuccessfully, of course, to trace the car she had seen. The courier was never mentioned in the FBI report. So what was Ruby doing in aiding the sale? It's also a coincidence that this was the day of the assassination, of the Walker shooting. So did this trigger off something? I don't know. It may be just a pure coincidence. But maybe the task was purely a helpful one on behalf of Ruby, but it certainly indicates his close connection to the Dallas Police Department. There's these telephone calls. I've taken that from Bloody Treason, the old Twyman's book. I'm sure you won't mind that I've just shown it to you. The diagram shows calls made and received by Jack Ruby from the club, his Carousel Club, in the days quite close to the time of the assassination. Many of them are mob chieftains or their cohorts. I'll just go through a few of them as an indicator of Ruby's association with some pretty unsavoury characters. On November the 12th, the Chicago mob's paymaster, Paul Jones, along with Teamsters organiser Alexander Gruber, who also worked for Sam Giancana and Mickey Cohen, stopped by Ruby's apartment for talks. This was the first time that Ruby had seen either for a considerable length of time. Yet here we have Ruby placing a 3-minute call to Gruber in Los Angeles at 2:37 p.m. just after the assassination. According to Larry Crawford, Ruby at the time was acting very nervous. At 3 p.m. Ruby was seen by a loan officer in the Merchant State Bank with about $7,000 in cash on his person, which he didn't actually pay in. Later, Gruber was unable to give any reason for meeting up with Jack Ruby just before the assassination. Ruby called Barney Baker in early November. Baker was a close associate of Jimmy Hoffa, who functions in the Teamsters as a versatile labour goon, or as Bobby Kennedy phrased it, one of Hoffa's roving emissaries of violence. Even the HSCA described him as a hoodlum who organised crime and Teamsters connections. Baker's telephone number was also found in one of Ruby's notebooks. However, in his deposition to the HSCA in April 78, Lewis McWillie denied that Ruby or he knew Barney Baker. Ruby's sister, Eva Grant, confirmed that her brother knew Dave Yaris, who worked for Giancana and Trafficante, and was described by various individuals as a mobster and killer. Yaris told the FBI that he had known Ruby for about 15 years in Chicago. The night before the assassination, Yaris was called person to person by Barney Baker. Then Ruby made 4 calls to Frank Carracci in June-July 63. This is before the assassination, of course. Carracci was identified in a Judiciary Committee hearing as a Cosa Nostra-involved gambler and strip joint operator. The night before the assassination, Yaris was called person to person by Barney Baker. sorry, I misread that. Life magazine described him as a Marcello mobster, so that he could have covered a lot of sins. Frank Karachi, if you read about him, he is a pretty unpleasant character. Lewis McWillie was a long-time friend of Jack Ruby. They first met in '51. McWillie worked as a professional gambler in Mississippi, Dallas, and then in Cuba, where he met John Martino, a fellow worker. McWillie became a business associate of Sam Giancana, Johnny Rosello, and the Lansky brothers. Ruby and McWillie spent much time together during a week-long trip that Ruby made to Havana in '59. McWillie was described by the DPD as a gambler and murderer. But 10 calls from Ruby to McWillie in June '63, just after the trip by JFK to Dallas was confirmed, what was all that about? And lastly, a 12-minute call person-to-person to Erwin S. Weiner at his Chicago home. Weiner was a prominent Chicago mafia who was instrumental in coordinating the flow of cash amongst the Teamsters Union, Las Vegas casinos, and the Chicago branch of the mob. Weiner and Ruby were boyhood friends, and like Ruby, Weiner was also involved with the mob's Cuban operations. He has been linked to arson, extortion, Medicare fraud, gambling, bribery, and murder. His close associates include Trafficante, Giancana, and Hoffa. So, obviously, an all-round nice guy. Anyway, all these visits and telephone calls by Ruby suggest that there was a major mob conspiracy going down. In fact, there would seem to be sufficient evidence to indicate there was some sort of involvement by the mafia in the assassination of John Kennedy. There's some of his mates. There's Lewis McWillie. There's Joe Campisi. Of course, Joe ran a bloody good restaurant, and I'm sure some of you have eaten at the Egyptian Lounge and enjoyed a good Italian meal. Now, Jack's trial. Just a few words about this. Let's look at the Melvin Belli, who was the guy who represented him. He was employed apparently by Earl, his brother, who happened to be a friend of California mobster Mickey Cohen, who had previously defended Candy Barr on narcotics charges. Candy was a stripper and a girlfriend of Mickey's and knew Jack very well. Earl paid Belli $25,000 to secure his services, much less than he would normally have charged, but Belli had hoped to benefit from writing a book later on. I've also read, actually, that Belli represented Ruby pro bono. Now, Barney Ross was called, who was a childhood friend of Ruby, because what they were trying to do was to prove that Ruby was a decent guy. And so Barney Ross was called to give evidence, and childhood friend who'd gone on to become world welterweight boxing champion. And he cited the squalor that Jack had grown up in, but despite this, he was considered honest and reputable. And then there was a guy called Roby Pryor, who was a printer for Dallas Times Herald and once worked for Ruby. He cited Jack taking presents to a Catholic orphanage. He also pointed out Ruby's deteriorating mental state, citing a long conversation he had with him about the Kennedy family and what a terribly upset state Ruby was in. Anyway, the jurors didn't believe Ruby, and he was committed for first-degree murder, found guilty, and was due to be executed, which was later overturned. Now, if Ruby had pleaded guilty to murder without malice, he probably would have got off with 5 years. In fact, that is almost certain that what he was going to do on his retrial. He would plead guilty to murder without malice. He'd get 5 years. He'd spent nearly 3 years in jail, so he'd been out in less than 2. Now, the reason that the trial was found to be illegal, that it shouldn't have been in Dallas, that the TV had made each of the jurors witnesses to the murder, and so his conviction was actually overturned. We know
Sorry, can I just pause there for 1 second? Can everybody see Stuart's screen? Okay, yeah. Sorry, that's fine.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, please continue. Sorry, Stuart.
Okay, no, don't worry. Anyway, you can see a few things up I put about Jack's trial, but one thing I haven't put up yet, what I thought was
Okay, everybody, I'm so sorry about that. We've lost our internet connection here. I'm just going to pull that back up. Bart, I will admit you into the room. It looks like everybody's back. And Johnny, that is quite a Christmas tree you've got there, mate. Okay, apologies. Stuart, thank you for your patience. No, I'm going to pass you back to Stuart. We'll continue. Go ahead.
Okay, folks. Sorry about that.
Moment. Bart, I'm going to mute you. There you go. Go.
Okay. I was talking about Jack's trial and the fact that the Washington Post reported that during one of the sittings, 7 prisoners brandishing guns carved from bar of soap and made out of wax, string, paper, metal and shoe polish mounted a jailbreak from cells 4 flights above the courtroom. The gun actually looked very realistic. One of the criminals took the court clerk hostage. Bill Decker was also there at the time. Naturally, there ensued a period of bedlam around the building as this was taking place. Anyway, a BBC correspondent covering the Ruby trial and speaking over the telephone to disbelieving colleagues in London, in a rather excited and agitated voice, he was heard to shout, "Listen, you bloody fools, this is America, this is Texas, any bloody thing is possible here." Anyway, the prisoners were soon captured and taken back to their cells. 2 of them remained on the loose for some time. But you can actually view that. There's a TV broadcast about it online. And the court clerk was a middle-aged lady, but she remained really calm throughout the time that she was held by this guy with a dummy gun. So, Ruby verdict. I've just got this is a report on the television at our Pathé News on the final verdict as it was made
The historic 23 days end in a Dallas courtroom as Jack Ruby is taken in to hear the verdict in his trial for the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald, accused assassin of President Kennedy. The charge had been murder with malice, the defense insanity. The ruling that barred all cameras from the courtroom is lifted as Judge Joe B. Brown prepares to hear from the jury their decision of the case. The jurors had heard the final summations in the early morning hours, and they had deliberated for a little over 2 hours before returning to the jury box. Now, the News of the Day cameraman records the judge's words in the tense final moments of a drama that began in national tragedy last November.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have reached a verdict. May I have it, Sheriff, please? Jury found the defendant guilty of murder with malice as charged in the indictment and assessed his punishment at death. Signed Max E. Causey Foreman. So say you all, is that your unanimous verdict? Will all of you whose verdict that is, please hold up your right hands. All right, Sheriff, be your verdict. Keep your seats, please. There'll be no moving out. Don't let anybody else go.
As Ruby is led away, the shouts of Chief Defense Counsel Melvin Belli are still heard above the excited hubbub that sweeps the courtroom. The prisoner is led back to the cell where he will be held until the final disposition of his appeal. Reporters hear a distraught and emotional Attorney Belli reiterate his determination to appeal the verdict.
Right, just moving on. This is the meeting between Ruby, Irwan and Gerald Ford. It took place in June '64, and I do often wonder why it took so long to get to Jack. And they were afraid, I think, that they would hear too much actually from him. But he was desperate to talk and to give his side of the story. But he was also extremely afraid of giving evidence in Dallas. He insisted on taking a polygraph test because he wanted to tell the truth. But his family were against that because they believed his mental state was now suffering. He wanted to move to Washington to give his evidence, and Warren could have moved him, but chose not to do so. Subsequently, Ruby tried to commit suicide on 3 separate occasions. Ruby was desperate to get there. He used words like, "Gentlemen, unless you get me to Washington, you can't get a fair shake out of me. If you understand my way of talking, you have to get me to Washington to take the test. I want to tell the truth. I can't do it here. Does that make sense to you? Gentlemen, my life is in danger here, not with my guilty plea of execution. Do I sound sober enough to you as I say it? I tell you, my whole family is in jeopardy. There is a certain organisation here, if it takes my life at the moment to say it. Bill Decker said, 'Be a man and say it.' Unfortunately for me, for giving up the people the opportunity to get into power because of the act committed by myself has put a lot of people in jeopardy and their lives. I won't be living long now." And so he goes on. He was in a desperate state. He actually took the polygraph test, and just out of interest, he was asked, "Did you know Oswald before the 22nd of November? No. Did you shoot Oswald in order to silence him? No. Did you first decide to shoot Oswald on Saturday? No. Did you decide to shoot Oswald on Sunday? Yes. Did you shoot Oswald because of any influence of the underworld? No. Were you at Parkland at any time Friday? No. I think he was a bloody liar, actually. But anyway, that's what came out. I don't know why he wanted the polygraph test, but they believed that he was psychotic depressive, and they decided they would not use any results from that polygraph test, although I would have thought that it would have suited the Warren Commission quite well indeed. Now, this is, some of you may have seen this in the past, but this is a really interesting statement that has been made by Jack Ruby during one of the, as he left his trial.
Jack Ruby gave clear clues to his role in the assassination when he was interviewed on camera.
We'll never know the true facts. What occurred, people had no degree and had such an ulterior motive for putting a position on him. We'll never know the true facts. Some of our voice to the world. Now these people are very hot. Yeah.
Jack Ruby said he would reveal the true story of the Kennedy assassination if he was moved from Dallas to Washington, D.C. for protection. Ruby feared for his life if he testified in Dallas, but no transfer to Washington, D.C. was ever authorized by federal authorities.
That's what you got to learn. I want to get to that thing before you were very certain. You right there? Yes, I did when I went to the Adelaide Sea. The sea was very certain. There was never been a commission that ever president. Yes, it was clear, man. Yeah, sure, the man in office now.
So, I think that was a rather chilling statement. I think he was indicating there that Lyndon Baines Johnson was responsible for the assassination. Remember the Pearl Street Mafia? H.L. Hunt had direct link to Ed Clark, Johnson's chief lawyer. Hunt also had a direct link to Ruby, apparently, and downwards to Ruby and upwards to the Mafia. Information could well have leaked down the Mafia chain to Civello and Campisi. Jack Ruby knew Malcolm Wallace, who's a top Johnson aide and killer. Billy Celestes believes Wallace had direct contact with Ruby on matters concerning Lee Harvey Oswald. So I don't think we will ever know, but Jack seems to have been totally convinced regarding Johnson's involvement in that. I was going to go through why I think Johnson could well have been the killer, but I won't. We haven't got a lot of time yet, and I don't want to drop too far behind. So I'm going to move on to the last slide, which is quite interesting. It's a statement from Shari Angel, interviewed by Ian Griggs. This is many years ago, of course. So Ian says, "Shari, just one more question. This is probably, maybe it's the most difficult of all. Why did Jack Ruby shoot Lee Harvey Oswald?" Shari says, "Because he was told to. You honestly believe that? It was a mafia hit. It wasn't this thing about saving Jackie from Lyndon Johnson had it done. Johnson, and there's Sherry, and there's Ian. I'll always believe that with all my heart and soul. Did you notice the motorcade? Jack Kennedy did not have one security guard riding on his car. Johnson's was filled with them. I'll never believe anything and something unintelligible. And I've seen Jack and President Lyndon Baines Johnson together in this same hotel where we are right now. In the Adolphus Hotel here in Commerce Street. Yeah, me and Madeleine Brown saw them. When was that, Sherry? That was before the assassination. So you're saying that before the assassination, here in the Adolphus Hotel in Dallas, you saw Jack Ruby with the Vice President, H.L. Hunt, W.O. Bankston, all those people, a lawyer, I forgot his name, and Lyndon, and Madeleine was with me. Madeleine Brown, and how long before the assassination? She was still in love with him, Lyndon. Oh, I know, yes. How long? She told me to come on over here. I didn't know what was going on over here. About when was this show? How long before the assassination? Probably about 3 or 4 months before the assassination. So the story that was put out that Jack Ruby shot Oswald to save Jackie the pain of a court job, that's nonsense. Is that what you believe? He loved Jackie, he really did. So there's the guys that she was talking about. Bankston, I hadn't come across him before. There's Hunt and there's Bankston. He was a guy who picked up in a boxcar in 1932 by Bill Decker, who took him to the county jail because he was a hobo. He was penniless. But he was befriended by Bill Decker, and who got him a job at the local Ford plant. Bankston eventually opened his own car dealership and expanded his business massively, eventually becoming extremely rich, a multi-millionaire. However, he remained a very close friend of Dallas County Sheriff Bill Decker. Lafayette Harrison Hunt, as you will probably remember, was an extremely rich oil tycoon and a lifelong racist who provided major funding to several far-right organisations, including the Minutemen and John Birch Society. He was not a Kennedy lover. My guess is that he would have suffered financially under Kennedy's presidency because of the planned cut in the oil depletion allowance. But make no bones about it, there were some very rich people in the room that day, and what were they up to? We will probably never know. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Stuart. That's fantastic. Great way. And Paul, thanks for your patience and working through our technical difficulties. Before we move on, there is a question that Hugo, you wanted to ask, and forgive me, since I've been kicked out, the question that you posted in the chat has been lost to me. So do you want to unmute yourself, Hugo, and just pop the question to Stuart, and then we can take any other questions. And Johnny, I'll pass on to you then.
Perfect. I had a little question about a taxi driver you told about, who said that Ruby was in his taxi, mentioning his name 3 or 4 times. And I was wondering if after the assassination or late in the recent years, if the taxi driver ever mentioned if his Ruby was the same Ruby as the one who killed Oswald.
That was never mentioned. I doubt whether, well, it could have been. I mean, the letter was sent to the FBI, and he mentioned Ruby. He said his name's Jack Ruby. It was pretty obvious he worked in Dallas in the nightclub. So it was either Jack Ruby genuinely a few days before the assassination in San Francisco, or it was somebody who was impersonating him. But it would be too much of a coincidence, I think, to say that this was another Ruby living in San Francisco taking a trip in that taxi.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was the real one or if it was an imposter. So,
well, that could be, yes, I agree entirely. It could well have been an imposter, but why? I mean, it was so specific. It's a bit like an Oswald lookalike. They went out of their way to make, but they had to, didn't they? If you're trying to set somebody up to sheep dip them, you've got to make it emphatic. You've got to make sure that people notice. He was really trying to make himself notice. Yep. You'd say, why would he do that? Yep. Why would he do it? Because he's sitting in a taxi in San Francisco. it just seems most strange. But why would they want to? Maybe part of the plot that never came about relied on the fact that Ruby was in San Francisco that day, and therefore would not have been responsible for something later on. I don't know, but it just seems most strange that he was setting himself up. I mean, if you got into well, I wouldn't start talking about my private life to a taxi driver. I might talk about the weather or the latest football results, but it does seem strange.
Thank you. Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Hugo.
Thanks, Tony.
I've got a question. Yeah, it's a brilliant talk. The problem was I missed part of it. I had my own technical breakdown on top of the one that you had. So, yeah, thanks for letting me back in again. No, it's brilliant. There's a lot of stuff in there. I don't know if you mentioned it or not though, because of the breakdowns. Did you have anything on Ruby's connections with the President Nixon connection?
I certainly didn't mention it, Tony, but he certainly did, didn't he? I mean, later on.
Yeah. Because Nixon apparently went white when he saw the assassination. He saw Ruby shoot Oswald on TV. Apparently, he went white and said, "I know that man," and he'd been employed by him. I'm sorry.
Where was Nixon at the time?
He was with the ambassador, the American ambassador to Iceland. And he was the guy who mentioned that, who witnessed that. Yeah, apparently.
Back in Washington. I mean.
Yeah, apparently, yes. This is what I read anyway. And I just wondered if you got any more on that, because that was the most interesting.
I haven't at the moment, but I'm still reading up about the guy. Do you believe he might have been at the supposed party the night before when Johnson said that guy isn't going to cause me any problems after tomorrow? Because Nixon was supposed to have been there, wasn't he?
Yeah, because it's interesting because Nixon was also his alibi was that he was with the movie star. What's her name? I forgot the name now. But anyway, she was head of Pepsi Cola, and there was a Pepsi Cola convention going on at the same time.
Yeah.
And Nixon was supposed to be there, but some people said Nixon was there. I mean, it was only a short plane ride. They could have got up there by plane. You know, they said he couldn't have been there, but same with Johnson. But Ruby was definitely there anyway. I'm certain about that because he took a girl with him who for various purposes. And, I think that was his connection actually with the oil billionaires. You know, he used to supply them with prostitutes and so forth. You know.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's what Baker was doing, wasn't he? As well, that was the scandal.
Yeah.
Was prostitutes at a very high level. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting your talk. Yeah, especially the details you have about the ladies in his life. I think personally, just my point of view is that the key to it all is with Ruby. Really, you know, the more you investigate Ruby, the more you find out about Oswald and everything else. You know, it's The mafia sort of showed their hand when he. Sorry, what were you going to say, Tony?
Actually, we've got another couple of questions.
Sorry, I'll get off now. Yeah. Thanks very much. Anyway, brilliant talk.
Johnny, if you can bear with us, I know you're waiting to come in and give your presentation, but I'm going to, if it's okay, Johnny, I'm just going to quickly go to Richard and then to Tony, and then we'll come to you. So, sorry, Johnny. Thanks, mate. Thanks, Johnny. Richard, go ahead.
Thanks, Tony. Stuart, great talk. Thanks very much indeed for that. Just three little snippets that always puzzle me. The fact that Ruby was ostensibly so enamored with Jack and Jackie Kennedy that he would be in the Dallas Morning News sorting out the mundanities of his advert when the president was coming to town always strikes me as bizarre. But anyway, that's a side issue. You mentioned interestingly the... sorry, Stuart.
No, I was going to say he actually changed, apparently, after the assassination, he changed that, didn't he? He changed it to an advert in remembrance of the Kennedys. In other words, it was a tribute to Kennedy, wasn't it?
Yeah, very strange
Quite
though,
right.
that he would miss the chance to see him in the flesh. And
Absolutely,
it's just
yes,
like
you're quite right.
implausible,
Yeah, you're
isn't it?
quite right.
It was interesting that you touched on the polygraph test, because I've looked into that a little bit. Because the FBI agent Bill Herndon, who took the polygraph test, it's now accepted that he violated at least 10 principles of good polygraph testing. I mean, the room should only contain the polygraph tester and the subject, and there were about 20 people in that room.
Yeah,
and the polygraph test lasted over 5 hours with 100 questions, which is just because it's well known that liars excel when test fatigue sets in. So after 5 hours of questioning, he's no longer showing the classic symptoms. So it's virtually worthless. But anyone who's interested in that, Elmer Gertz's book Moments of Madness has the full polygraph transcript. So that's quite interesting.
Yes, I have read it. Yes.
And the last thing I just wanted to share, when you were touching on the Carousel Club, because it makes me smile, from the Wills and Damaris book, where it said that Ruby was convinced that the promise of real glamour was fulfilled at the Carousel Club. Quote, this is quote, "This is a fucking high-class place," he would assure doubters as he threw them down the stairs out of the club. It always makes me smile. Some high-class place. But thank you, Stuart. Great talk.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, chap. Well, Tony's not here at the moment. I'm just going to refresh my glass with some beer, and then we're going to look forward to our next presentation.
Oh,
She took it away, did she? Oh.
Yeah, she came to collect the glasses. It was an empty one over there.
Oh, was that? Yes.
I'm convinced that the eyes in that picture on the wall behind Stuart are going to move at any second, like a Scooby-Doo episode.
No, okay. Yeah, fine, thanks.
That was scary Shakespeare, that, isn't it?
Brilliant. Sorry guys, apologies. And Johnny, thanks a lot for your patience, mate. I know you've been waiting in the wings there, and let's take some questions. And again, Johnny, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us. Richard, I know you've got your hand up. Is that a legacy hand?
Yes, sorry, it is.
That's all right. Okay, but it's great. Okay. So again, Johnny,
I was going to say,
so much. Go ahead, Ian.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry, Tony. I'm so frustrated with the technical difficulties. This is being recorded. It's going to go on YouTube. Am I right?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. That's right. That's all I want to know. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Everything's been recorded. Yeah.
Brilliant.
No problem.
Thank you.
Johnny, thanks again for your patience, mate. And I must say, huge congratulations on what a mega Christmas tree you've got, and up so early as well. Fantastic. There's a man who loves Christmas. Look at the size of that tree. Isn't that amazing? Bloody hell.
Yeah, it's still November, so it's too early.
No, it's never too early. It's never too early.
It's a bit bar humbug, is it?
I'm jealous.
So, okay, so listen, just in case we have a technical issue, Johnny, I have actually made you co-host. So if anything happens here, you will be able to continue and the recording will continue. And Richard, I hope you don't mind, I've made you co-host as well. And like I say, it's just in case we have a technical issue here. So Johnny, I'm going to just pass straight on to yourself. Again, thanks a million for agreeing to talk to us. And as always, it'll be brilliant. I'm looking forward to it. Off you, if you're ready. And up to Celtic.
Well, Celtic are playing at 5:15, so.
Right. Well, we better finish up then. All right.
So basically, I'm just here today to talk about some of the evidence against Oswald in this case. So I think last year I spoke about the Manly car, I spoke about ammunition and stuff like that. So I'm just going to speak on some of the other evidence, like the paper bag. I'm going to speak about the palm print, which was allegedly found on the rifle. And I'm going to speak about, hopefully, if I have time, speak about chain of custody of the shells as well, which were allegedly found on the 6th floor. So basically, we all know that the story, the Warren Commission claimed that Oswald carried the broken down Manly car on the morning of the 22nd. They claimed that he used Commission Exhibit 142 to conceal the Manly car on his person, and this was allegedly seen by Beale Fraser and his sister, the only two people that ever seen the bag. Well, there is some problems with the Commission's hypothesis, and it begins to unravel pretty quickly when you take a look at the physical and scientific evidence which pertains to this paper bag. So Commission Exhibit 142 is alleged to be a homemade paper sack comprised of the same material used in the Texas School Book Depository. The Commission, as I've touched upon, charged that Oswald made the paper sack on the 21st, the day before the assassination, and he is alleged to have carried CE 139, which is the Manly car, on his person on the morning of the 22nd. Well, of course, there is some really serious problems with regards to the validity of that charge. Sorry, guys. Sorry, guys. I think the most damning comes in the testimony of the FBI agent, which is James Carrigan. James Carrigan was deposed by Melvin Eisenberg, and this is taken from his testimony. It says, Mr. Eisenberg, Mr. Carrigan, did you notice when you looked at the bag whether there were, that is the bag found on the 6th floor, Exhibit 142, whether it had any bulges or unusual creases? And Mr. Carrigan replied, Sorry. Mr. Carrigan says, I was also requested at that time to examine the bag to determine if there were any significant markings or scratches or abrasions or anything by which it could be associated with the rifle. Commission Exhibit 139. That is, could I find any markings that I could tie to that rifle? Mr. Eisenberg, yes, Mr. Carrigan, and I couldn't find any such markings. So, CE 142 cannot be scientifically or physically linked to Commission Exhibit 139. Of course, that isn't the only serious problem with regards to the Commission's conclusions about the sack. There is also no pictorial evidence which depicts the paper bag around the southeast corner window after the assassination. This is a serious problem because if it was there, it should have been captured within the crime scene photographs. Well, many Warren Commission advocates who I have encountered online, should I say, desperately try to salvage the lack of pictorial evidence into the bag, and they always assert, well, you know, a police officer must have prematurely removed the paper sack before the crime scene photographs were taken. But there is obviously a retort to this question, and it's this. I always ask them, doesn't the removal of important key evidence from the scene of a crime before any such scene is photographed for preservation purposes not constitute as evidence tampering, which of course it does? But then it also gets even worse for a Warren Commission apologist, because we find that no evidence was removed until after Lieutenant Day and Detective Studebaker came up and took pictures of the scene. So there was apparently nothing removed from the 6th floor. Well, the Commission knew they had a serious problem with regards to the lack of any pictorial evidence depicting the bag after the assassination. So, printed in the Commission volumes, there is Commission Exhibit 1302. 1302 is a manufactured depiction of where the paper sack was allegedly found on the 22nd. And under the tagline, approximate location of the paper bag, Studebaker of the Dallas Police was instructed to draw a dotted line on this photograph to simulate where, in his opinion, the sack allegedly lay on the 6th floor after the assassination. And again, taken from his testimony, this is taken from his testimony. Questioning counsel was Joseph Ball. Mr. Ball asks Mr. Studebaker, "Do you recognise the diagram 1302?" Mr. Studebaker, "Yes, sir." Mr. Ball, "Did you draw the diagram?" Mr. Studebaker, "I drew a diagram in there for the FBI. Somebody from the FBI called me down. I can't think of his name, and he wanted an approximate location of where the paper was found." So this causes serious problems, because not only does Commission Exhibit 1302 hold little or no value as evidence, but the use of such an exhibit is legally and ethically questionable, especially in regard to the citation from Volume 7, which was that no evidence was removed from the scene until the crime scene photographs were actually taken. So 1302's inclusion within the exhibits of the report highlight, in my opinion, the lengths the Commission went in order to place a gun sack on the 6th floor after the assassination. Well, the various officers who were present on the 6th floor also testified to the presence of a paper sack. And below I have highlighted just some of the testimony which pertains to that subject. The first is Mr. Hicks. Questioning counsel again was Joseph Ball. Mr. Ball asked Mr. Hicks, "Did you ever see a paper sack and the items that were taken from the Texas School Book Depository building?" Mr. Hicks, "Paper sack." Mr. Ball, "Paper bag." Mr. Hicks, "No, sir, I did not. It seems like there was some chicken bones or maybe a lunch. No, I believe that someone had galloned it up." Mr. Ball, "Well, this was another type of bag made out of brown paper. Did you ever see it?" Mr. Hicks, "No, sir, I don't believe I did. I don't recall it." We also have the testimony of Roger Craig, who was asked by David Bellin if he remembered seeing a long sack lying on the floor. Roger Craig replied to him, "No, I don't remember seeing any type of paper bag on the floor." Also, the testimony of Gerald Hill. Mr. Hill was asked about the paper bag, and he replied, "The only specifics we discussed were this. You were asking Officer Hicks if either one recalled seeing a sack, supposedly one that had been made by the suspect, in which he could have possibly carried the weapon into the depository. And I, at that time, told you about the small sack that appeared to be a lunch sack, and that was the only sack that I saw, and that I left the book depository prior to the finding of the gun." So Mr. Hill is referencing the chicken lunch and the small sack that was apparently used by Bonnie Ray Williams, that was used to conceal his lunch or transport his lunch to the building that day. That was the only bag that he had seen on the 6th floor. Well, another problem with the Commission's conclusion that Oswald had indeed carried the bag into the depository that morning comes in the form of the composition of the bag itself, because no eyewitness ever testified that they saw Oswald engage in the construction of the bag. The materials for the bag were allegedly, well, actually not allegedly, they were made from materials in the school book depository. So in this regard, Troy West was a very important witness. Mr. West was the employee who dispensed paper and basically he was in charge of all the materials for packing, paper, tape and string, etc. He told the Warren Commission that his station was on the first floor of the Texas School Book Depository, and that he stayed at his station all day. He didn't actually leave his station to watch the motorcade on 11/22/1963. So Mr. West also said during his testimony that he knew who Oswald was, and he also testified that he never saw Oswald attempt to make such a bag or was anywhere near his workstation. Now, questioning counsel for Mr. West was David Bellin, who asked Mr. West, did you ever see him around those wrapper rolls or wrapper roll machines or not? Mr. West replied, no, sir, I never noticed him being around. Well, we all know that the man who studied this area more than anyone was the late Ian Griggs, and he authored an article called The Paper Bag That Never Was. Well, Ian noted what makes this testimony, West's testimony, rather bothersome, and there are two factors in this. First, West noted that it was not possible to take the tape out of the dispenser since it was linked into a mechanical apparatus that applied water to it as it passed through. And secondly, the FBI claimed that no tape on the sack, secondly, the FBI claimed that the tape on the sack had the markings of the machine. Okay, but I'll touch upon that later as well. Well, I reached out to Bureau Wesley Fraser on Facebook. It was just I just thought that I've got nothing to lose. I might as well try to contact him through his Facebook page. So it was worth a shot. And when he got back to me, I was actually quite surprised. So I asked him a few questions regarding this case, of course, and regarding Oswald and the paper bag. And one of the questions I asked him was, on 11/21/1963, prior to, during, or after you gave Lee a ride back to Irvine, did you observe at any time Lee with a brown paper bag or materials to construct a brown paper bag? And Mr. Fraser replied to myself, no, he did not. Which is obviously very strange, because why would Oswald, go to such lengths to conceal a paper bag on his person? It doesn't make any sense. So we actually do have a witness that states that Oswald didn't have this bag on the 21st. And that's really important in my opinion. Well, also another important point was that the materials for the paper sack, which was allegedly constructed on the 21st, were an exact match for paper materials which were used to construct a replica bag by the Dallas police on the 22nd. This replica bag was designated the tag CE677, and Alan Dulles and staff lawyer Melvin Eisenberg had a discussion about this point. Dulles asked Eisenberg, could we get, just before you continue there, would you identify what C142 and C677 is? Melvin Eisenberg, C142 is apparently a homemade paper bag which was found in the southeast corner of the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository following the assassination, and which, for the record, is a bag which may have been used to carry this rifle, CE139, which was used to commit the assassination, allegedly. CE677 is a sample of paper and tape, and parenthetically, tape was used in the construction of CE142. CE677 is a sample of paper and tape obtained from the Texas School Book Depository on November the 22nd, 1963. That is the very day of the assassination. A very important thing to note here is that it's a fact that Commission Exhibit 677 was taken on the 22nd, and also when comparing the paper samples from CE142 and CE677, an FBI man by the name of James Carrigan testified to the following. Questioning counsel was Melvin Eisenberg. In these cases, did you make the examination both of the tape and the paper in each of the bag in the sample? James Carrigan, oh yes. Mr. Eisenberg, and they were identical? Yes, they were identical. Well, the Commission did have some evidence that Oswald had allegedly came into contact with this paper bag. They had 2 of Oswald's prints were allegedly found on the paper bag. A partial print of his right palm and a partial print of his left index finger were found on the bag. Now, this is the bit that's always kind of bothered me about this point. Now, Oswald was supposed to have constructed this bag from scratch. Oswald was then deemed to have handled the bag to place the broken down Mannlicher inside of it, carried the bag to work, hid the bag, retrieved the bag, emptied the bag of its contents in order to carry out the assassination. So Lee is supposed to have handled this bag in this way, in such a way, but he only managed to somehow get part of a right palm print and part of a left index print on it. Well, in my opinion, if Oswald had made and handled Commission Exhibit 142 in the way outlined by the Commission, then undoubtedly his prints would have been all over it. The fact that only part of a right palm print and part of a left index print are alleged to have been found on the bag is just not credible to me, and that it is in itself indicative of a frame-up. But then don't just take my word for it, because as I alluded to earlier, Ian Griggs probably has the longest and most thorough analysis of this issue in the whole of the JFK assassination literature. His 35-page long essay, titled The Paper Bag That Never Was, examines the testimony of 17 witnesses. And I don't want to spoil it for those who've never read it, but at the end of that essay, Ian makes a series of conclusions about this evidence. Among them are that there is no photograph of the sack in situ after the assassination, because the sack did not exist at the time of the assassination. The Commission actually used 3 exhibit numbers for the paper bag in order to confuse the matter. These were Commission Exhibit 142, Commission Exhibit 364, and Commission Exhibit 626. The middle exhibit number was a replica bag to show witnesses, since the original was damaged too much during testing. And as Ian Griggs writes in his book, that excuse is just too ridiculous to consider seriously. So to sum up, the value of the paper bag as evidence, there is no evidence whatsoever, as testified to by an FBI agent, that the bag ever held a broken down Mannlicher Carcano rifle. There was no traces of oil on the bag. There was no bulges or creases that they could marry up from the broken down Mannlicher to the bag. There was just nothing. There was no scientific evidence that the bag actually held a broken down rifle. There is no evidence whatsoever in the official crime scene photographs, and the witness testimony is very patchy as to the existence of the bag. As for the official crime scene photographs, that would be key evidence in any trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. And in my opinion, a competent defence attorney would attack this piece of evidence by asking any prosecution or anybody to furnish a photograph showing the bag in situ after the assassination. It just simply doesn't exist. So yeah, in my opinion, the paper bag that never was truly is that. It wasn't there after the assassination. And as Ian Griggs has pointed out previously, if there is no gun sack, there is no gun. And that's how key a paper bag is to the Warren Commission narrative. So I'm going to move on, because I can't be really waffling too much, on the palm print, which was of Oswald allegedly found on the Mannlicher after the assassination. So if you just bear with me for a second, I'll just get this up. Right, Parker Camden's. Okay, actually, first of all, I want to talk about the chain of custody for Commission Exhibit 543, 544, and 545. I'm just going to let my dog out. Bear with me for a second. Come on, son.
Come on, Johnny, look after the dog. That's important.
Yeah, I know. But on you go if you want. Okay, so so I'm going to talk about the chain of custody of the shells. So actually, yeah. So basically, the rifle shells on the 6th floor add a lot of controversy into this case. The shells, which the Commission concluded had been used in the assassination, were discovered, according to the Warren report, by Deputy Sheriff Luke Mooney, and taken from the Warren Commission report, I think it's page 79, is the following information. Around 1 p.m, Deputy Sheriff Luke Mooney noticed a pile of cartons in front of the window in the southeast corner of the 6th floor. Searching the area, he found at approximately 1:12 p.m, 3 empty cartridge cases on the floor near the window. Well, a few obvious questions arise with regard to the subsequent discovery of the alleged sniper's nest and the shells contained therein. First question is, with various witnesses reporting to the police in the immediate aftermath of the president's murder that they had indeed witnessed a rifle in the possession of a man or men on the upper floors of the building, then why did the Dallas police not immediately converge upon the book depository's 6th floor? Instead, the police decided to commence a floor-by-floor canvass of the building in search of a gunman or evidence linked to the crime. This was in spite of the various witness testimonies to a man/men with a rifle on the upper floors. And the other obvious question is, why did it take Mooney 12 minutes between his discovery of the alleged sniper's nest to his apparent discovery of the 3 spent cartridge cases? According to Mooney's testimony, once he had ventured down from the 7th floor, and this is direct from his testimony, I went back down, I went straight across to the southeast corner of the building, and I saw all these high boxes. Of course, they were stacked all the way around there, and I squeezed between 2. And the minute I squeezed between these 2 stacks of boxes, I had to turn myself sideways to get in there. Then, that is when I saw the expended shells and the boxes that were stacked up looked to be a rest for a weapon. So there you have it. Mooney's testimony refutes the information contained in the Warren report regarding the 12-minute discovery between the shielded cartons and the expended shells. And in reference to the earlier quoted testimony, the minute I squeezed between these 2 stacks of boxes, that is when I saw the expended shells. So where did the Warren Commission get the 12-minute delay? It's a mystery to me, and it's obviously a gross error in the report. Well, also in reference to Captain Will Fritz and his conduct in handling the evidence, we found the following printed from the report. When he was notified of Mooney's discovery, Captain J. Will Fritz, Chief of the Homicide Bureau of the Dallas Police Department, issued instructions that nothing be moved or touched until technicians from the police crime laboratory could take photographs and check for fingerprints. Well, this account is disputed by a cameraman for WFA TV, Mr. Tom Allier. Mr. Allier was present on the 6th floor after the assassination. Well, Allier stated that after filming the casings with my wide-angle lens from a height of 4.5 feet, I asked Captain Will Fritz, who was standing at my side, if I could go behind the barricade and get a close-up shot of the casings. He told me that it would be better if I got my shots from outside the barricade. He then rounded the pile of boxes and entered the enclosure. This was the first time anybody had walked between the barricade and the windows. Fritz then walked to the casings, picked them up, and held them in his hand over the top of the barricade for me to get a close-up shot of the evidence. I filmed between 3 to 4 seconds of a close-up shot of the shell casings in Captain Fritz's hand. Fritz did not return them to the floor, and he did not have them in his hand when he was examining the shooting support boxes. I stopped filming and thanked Fritz. I have been asked many times if I thought it was peculiar that the captain of homicide picked up evidence with his hands. Actually, this was the first thought that came to me when he did it, but I rationalised that he was the homicide expert and no prints could be taken from spent shell casings. Over 30 minutes later, after the rifle was discovered and the crime lab arrived, Captain Fritz reached into his pocket and handed the casing to Detective Studebaker to include in the photographs he would take of the Sniper's Nest crime scene. We stayed at the rifle site to watch Lieutenant Day dust the rifle. You have seen my footage of this. Studebaker never saw the original placement of the casings, so he tossed them on the floor and photographed them. Therefore, any photograph of shell casings taken after this is staged and not correct. Well, it also should be noted that Allier also said that the shells were in close proximity to each other at first appearance. There are also two other witnesses who backed Allier up on this. The first is Roger Craig and Luke Mooney. This arrangement of the shells is not how they appear in the commission volumes, which is Commission Exhibit 512. Once the official crime scene photographs were taken, Lieutenant Day and Detective Sims proceeded to collect the shells from the 6th floor. The floor of the 6th floor. Sorry, I shut this door. So, during his testimony before the Warren Commission, Lieutenant Day stated what course of action he took in relation to preserving the shells as evidence. Questioning counsel was David Bellin. Mr. Bellin, all right, let me first hand you what has been marked as Commission Exhibit, part of Commission Exhibit 543 and 544, and ask you to state if you know what it is. Mr. Day, that is the envelope the shells were placed in. Mr. Bellin, how many shells were placed in the envelope? Mr. Day, 3. Mr. Bellin, it says here, it is written on here, 2 of the 3 spent hulls under window on 6th floor. Mr. Day, yes, sir. Mr. Bellin, did you put all 3 there? Mr. Day, they were in there when they were turned over to Detective Sims at that time. The only writing on it was Lieutenant J.C. Day down here at the bottom. David Bellin, I see. Mr. Day, Dallas Police Department and the date. Mr. Bellin, in other words, you didn't put the writing in that says 2 of the 3 spent hulls. Mr. Day, not then. About 10 o'clock in the evening, this envelope came back to me with 2 hulls in it. I say it came to me. It was in a group of stuff, a group of evidence. We were getting ready to release to the FBI. I don't know who brought them back. Vincent Drain of the FBI was present with the stuff. The first I noticed it. At that time, there were 2 hulls inside. I was advised the homicide division were retaining the first shell for their use. At that time, I marked the 2 hulls inside of this, still inside the envelope. Mr. Bellin, that envelope which is part of Commission Exhibit 543 and 544. Mr. Day, yes, sir. I put the additional marking on at that time. Mr. Bellin, I see. Mr. Day, you will notice there is a little difference in the ink writing. Mr. Bellin, but all of the writing there is yours. Mr. Day, yes, sir. Mr. Bellin, now at what time did you put any initials, if you did put any such initials, on the hull itself? Mr. Day, at about 10 o'clock when I noticed it back in the Identification Bureau in this envelope. Mr. Bellin, had the envelope been opened yet or not? Mr. Day, yes, sir, it had been opened. Mr. Bellin, had the shells been out of your possession then? Mr. Day, Mr. Sims had the shells from the time they were moved from the building, or he took them from me at that time, and the shells I did not see again until around 10 o'clock. Mr. Bellin, who gave them to you at 10 o'clock? Mr. Day, they were in this group of evidence being collected to turn over to the FBI. I don't know who brought them back. Mr. Parker, Mr. Bellin, was the envelope sealed? Mr. Day, no, sir. Mr. Bellin, had it been sealed when you gave it to Sims? Mr. Day, no, sir, no. Well, Bellin also elicits the following in regards to the chain of possession of the shells. Mr. Bellin, your testimony now is that you did not mark any of the hulls at the scene. Mr. Day, those 3, no, sir. Well, further in his testimony, Day states he recognises CE543 because it has the initials GD on it. Surprisingly, they failed to acknowledge the other defining characteristic on Commission Exhibit 543, because contained on the lip of the shell is a dent, which has led many experts to conclude that this shell could not have held a bullet which was fired during the assassination. But he did admit that this very peculiar dented shell was not sent to the FBI the night of the assassination. It is surprising that after Day admits this, Bellin does not ask the obvious question, why was this hull not sent up to the FBI? Well, again, taken from the testimony of Day, David Bellin again, questioning counsel. Now I'm going to ask you to state if you know what Commission Exhibit 543 is. Mr. Day, that is a hull that does not have my marking on it. Mr. Bellin, do you know whether or not this was one of the hulls that was found at the Texas School Book Depository? Mr. Day, I think it is. Mr. Bellin, what makes you think it is? Mr. Day, it has the initials GD on it, which is George Doughty, the captain that I worked under. Mr. Bellin, was he there at the scene? Mr. Day, no sir, this hull came up. This hull that is not marked came up later. I didn't send that. Note what Day seems to be saying here. He says that the hull was marked by someone who was not at the crime scene. Again, Bellin asks Day for clarification as to when Doughty marked the shell. But what makes this question even more off-key is that Bellin admits that he pre-interviewed Day in Dallas. And now Day has changed his story, because at that prior interview, Day admits that he told Bellin that he did initial the shells. Now he tells Bellin that after he thought over, no, he did not mark any of the shells at the scene. So at this point, Bellin actually said he should strike everything from the record and start the testimony all over again. Well, it actually got even worse for the chain of custody for these shells, because in a letter to the Commission dated April the 23rd, 1964, Lieutenant Day then throws his identification of Commission Exhibit 543 and their subsequent chain of custody into serious doubt. And this is the letter. He says, sir, in regard to the third hull, which I stated has GD for George Doughty scratched on it, Captain Doughty does not remember handling this. Please check again to see if possibly it can be VD or VED for Vincent Drain. Very yours truly, JC Day. So, through Day's testimony, we elicit that he did not mark the shells at the scene of the crime, even though they were in his possession. Furthermore, Day proceeded to place these unmarked shells into an unsealed envelope. This is a very weird situation, and David Bellin does not seem to bat an eyelash while he is discovering it, or the fact that the witness changed the story. Under these circumstances, then, how could Lieutenant Day swear under oath that the shells being presented in evidence against Oswald were the same ones allegedly found in the aftermath of the president's murder? Because Day neglected to mark the shells at the scene and then proceeded to place the shells in an unsealed, unmarked envelope. Well, another thing that fascinates me about Lieutenant Day's testimony is that it is seriously disputed by the press photographer Tom Allier, who I spoke about earlier. In a letter to the ARRB's Tom Salmaluk, which I got from the Prayer Man website, thank you, Bart, credit Bart Kamp, dated the 8th of the 15th, 1997, Allier states that regarding the perjured testimony given to the Warren Commission investigators by members of the Dallas Police Department, I understand there were several cases, but the one I checked for myself by reading the printed testimony in the Warren report involves Lieutenant Day and Detective Studebaker. These are the two crime lab men who dusted the evidence on the 6th floor. Their testimony is false from beginning to end. That's a very serious indictment, and it wouldn't have been made lightly by Tom Allier. Just for the record, Tom Allier believes Oswald to be guilty, so he's not one of these crazy conspiracy theorists which would just be disputing the official Dallas police narrative. So what should have happened with regards to these shells? Well, according to witness Tom Allier, Fritz was the first detective on the scene to come into contact with the shells. Fritz should have then marked these shells at the scene in accordance with the chain of custody. Fritz then gave the shells to Detective Studebaker. Studebaker should then have proceeded to mark these shells at the scene. But what the evidence seems to indicate is that Studebaker then threw the shells down on the floor of the southeast corner window and captured the crime scene photographs. Lieutenant Day then retrieved the shells from the floor with help from Detective Sims. Day should have marked these shells at the scene and then put them into a sealed envelope, clearly stating what lay within that envelope. Instead, Lieutenant Day gave up possession of the shells without adding his markings, which in turn lay in an unmarked, unsealed envelope. The envelope remained unsealed when Day took back possession of these hulls at 10 p.m. on the night of the murder. Sims should have marked the shells at the crime scene while in his possession, but yet Detective Sims does not even recall picking up the shells, because in a remarkable exchange with David Bellin, Sims admitted that in his first commission interview with Joe Ball, he did not mention doing this. In fact, at that time, he attributed the carrying of the envelope with the shells to Lieutenant Day. When Ball asks Sims if he took possession of the shells, Sims then denied it. There then had to be a conference between Bellin and Ball about this point, and Sims had to have been made aware of their worries, because 2 days after the April the 6th Ball interview, Sims was then recalled. And this is what worried them, because Bellin knew that Day was going to testify that he turned over the unsealed envelope with the shells to Sims. Therefore, they needed Sims on the record for this transfer for the evidence. Therefore, when Sims returned to the stand, this time his questioner was David Bellin. And in almost no time at all, Bellin is asking Sims about the specific point, the chain of custody of the shells. Sims now says that 2 days ago he did not recall who brought the shells to the police station, but now, like some sort of revelation, Sims says it was now himself that brought the shells to the police station. So it's an incredible turnaround. So basically, he's done a virtual 180 degrees on this point. And then after this exchange, Bellin asked Sims, well, how do you remember that it was you who brought the cartridges to the station? And Sims replies that in the interval, he talked to Captain Will Fritz and his partner E.L. Boyd on this point, and they helped refresh his memory as to what happened. So, in handling the most important pieces of evidence in the biggest case he ever worked on, Sims forgot that he indeed brought the cartridge cases to the station. But then, thanks to Will Fritz, Sims now recalled doing just that. But even then, this was included in Sims's revised testimony. Mr. Bellin, do you remember whether or not you ever initialed the hulls? Mr. Sims, I don't know if I initialed the hulls or not. Well, what makes this whole so bothersome is that there are established rules in the judicial system that every police department must follow with regards to the preservation of evidence. And by no stretch of the imagination did the Dallas police comply with any of them. It is a fact that had Oswald been permitted to stand trial, Commission Exhibits 543, 544 and 545 would have been a focus of serious questioning by a competent defence counsel. For example, in addition to all the above, the mess of the chain of custody, there is the dent problem that CE 543 presents. Ballistics expert Howard Donoghue has said that this cartridge could not have been used to fire a bullet that day, since the weapon would not have discharged properly. Well, people like Gerald Posner and Vincent Bugliosi and Robert Blakey have said that this shell could have been dented during firing. Well, Donoghue replied to that comment by saying that there was no shells dented in that manner by the HSCA, and that he had never seen a case dented like this. Both Josiah Thompson and British researcher Chris Mills tried in every way to dent a 6.5 Weston cartridge case like this one, and they both failed. Mills concluded that the only way it could be done was through loading empty shells, and only on a rare occasion. And if that wasn't the end of it, Thompson also wrote in 6 Seconds in Dallas that Commission Exhibit 543 contained 3 identifying marks revealing it had been loaded and extracted at least thrice before. These were not found on the other cartridge cases, but it's even more puzzling than that, because as Thompson wrote, of all the various marks discovered on this case, only one set links it to the follower, yet the magazine follower marks only the last cartridge in the clip. And the last cartridge in the clip was not Commission Exhibit 543, it was the live round which was allegedly ejected by the police officer on the 6th floor after the assassination. So, as you can see, the chain of custody is an absolute mess for these shells, which were allegedly found on the 6th floor. In fact, an American researcher, a guy by the name of Barry Krush, is so confident that the chain of custody for these shells is so non-existent that he's got a shell game challenge. So if anyone can authenticate the chain of custody for these shells, he would give them, I think it's $5,000 to do so. So that's how confident he is that these shells would be absolutely worthless as evidence. So because of time, I'm just going to quickly talk about the palm print on the rifle, which was allegedly found on the night of the 22nd. This alleged discovery of the print was made by Lieutenant J.C. Day of the Dallas Police on the night of the murder. And even at that early stage, it is alleged that Day had tentatively identified the palm print as coming from the main suspect, Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, the first question any competent defence attorney would ask is, well, is there any photographic evidence in existence of the palm print on C2766, which is the Mannlicher Carcano? Well, the shocking but unsurprising answer to that question is there is no contemporaneous photographic evidence. Standard practice is to photograph a lift before an attempt at its removal is made. This step is taken to safeguard against the possibility of losing the print, which makes perfect sense. Take, for example, the statements of FBI fingerprint expert Sebastian Latona. Primarily, our recommendation in the FBI is simply in every procedure to photograph and then lift the print. So the absence of any contemporaneous photograph of the print on the rifle is even more dumbfounding when we learn that Lieutenant Day attended an advanced latent print school conducted in Dallas by the FBI. There are photographs of other partial prints taken by Day, which were found on the exterior of the rifle. These prints were found to be valueless by the FBI, and if you want to know more about that, please check out part 3 of my presumption of innocence, which is on Kennedy and King. But yeah, so Day also claimed that he had taken these photographs around 8 p.m. on 11/22/1963. Day claimed that he did not take a photograph of the most important latent print, the palm print, because he was given orders by Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry to go no further with the processing of the rifle. However, prior to his commission testimony, Day related to the FBI that he received these orders from Curry shortly before midnight. So by his own admission, Day had almost 4 hours to photograph the print he identified as Oswald before receiving the orders from Chief Curry. Well, why did they not photograph the palm print? Because he must have known that this would be important evidence in any trial of Oswald. And not only is there no evidence that the palm print was ever present on the rifle, but when the FBI received the weapon and tested it for prints, they found no evidence of any fingerprint traces and no evidence of a lift ever being performed. Day testified that the print on the gun still remained on there. There was traces of ridges still on the gun barrel. That is in stark contrast to the findings of the FBI. There is also no independent collaboration as to Day's alleged lifting of the print, as Day claimed to be alone when he attempted such a lift. Day also apparently neglected to inform the FBI agent who transferred the rifle to Washington DC in the early morning hours of the 23rd. That FBI agent was Vincent T. Drain. Day said that he had informed Drain that he'd indeed found a palm print on the rifle, which he believed was Oswald's. But Drain disputes this. Drain says that if Day ever showed him, that Day never showed him any such print or left any indication on the rifle where to look for such a print. Also, once the rifle arrived in Washington, D.C., FBI hair and fiber expert Paul Stormbow examined the rifle, and he stated that he noticed immediately upon receiving the gun that this gun had been dusted for latent fingerprints prior to my receiving it. Latent fingerprint powder was all over the gun. Well, the question is this: how could powder survive on the gun from Dallas to Washington, but every single trace of powder in the dry ridges which were present around the palm print on the gun barrel under the stock vanish? That was asked by Sylvia Mager in our fantastic book, Excesses After the Fact. In my opinion, the best book on the case. Now, Captain Fritz was asked on Saturday, November 23rd, if Oswald's prints were found on the rifle. And Will Fritz replied, "No, sir." Chief Curry also made no mention of the important discovery to the media. In fact, the first mention of a palm print discovered on the rifle was announced on the 24th by Dallas DA Henry Wade. This was after the rifle was back in Dallas and after Oswald was murdered. Now, the following to me is very hard to swallow, because Day is alleged to have informed Fritz and Curry on 11/22/1963 that he had found a palm print on the rifle which allegedly was used in the killing of President Kennedy, and that he had tentatively identified the palm print as coming from the main suspect, Lee Oswald. Now, with this powerful information in their arsenal, neither Fritz, Curry, nor Wade, who were guilty of making many fraudulent and prejudicial statements of fact against Oswald, offered not once to the assembled media on the 22nd or the 23rd that the existence of Oswald's palm print had indeed been found on the suspected murder weapon. These statements emanating from law enforcement officials were so prejudicial against Oswald that they warranted comment from various sources, one of these being attorney Percy Foreman. Mr. Foreman stated that authorities are running a serious risk of jeopardizing their case against Oswald by failing to observe his constitutional rights. Officials may have already committed irreversible error in the case by permitting the accused to undergo more than 24 hours of detention without benefit of legal counsel. Give me that. Sorry, guys. Legal counsel. And citing grounds for reversal, Foreman stated that under recent decisions of the United States Supreme Court, federal procedural guarantees must be observed in state prosecutions. Their abridgment can be grounds for a reversal or even a conviction. This is a new law. They could get a conviction in Texas and get thrown out on appeal, but it takes a long time for these dim-witted law enforcement officers to realise it. I wonder if Mr. Foreman knew anyone personally in the Dallas police. Well, after Oswald's murder, all the evidence pertaining to the murder of President Kennedy was transferred from Dallas to Washington for good on the 26th of November. Sorry, guys. Day's alleged lift of the palm print on the rifle did not reach Washington until the 29th. Why did this important piece of evidence not arrive with the others? Well, in his book, Reasonable Doubt, Henry Hurt interviewed retired FBI agent Vincent Drain. Remember, Drain was the man who transferred the rifle from Dallas to Washington on the 23rd. And when Drain was asked about the authenticity of the palm print, Drain replied, "I just don't believe there was ever a print. All I can figure is that Oswald's print was some sort of cushion because the Dallas police were getting a lot of heat by Sunday night. You could take the print off Oswald's card and put it on the rifle. Something like that happened." And just the last part here, from Latona's testimony, it appears that the FBI never did find any of Oswald's prints on C2766. Latona confirmed Oswald's prints from pictures supplied to him by the Dallas police on November the 29th. So to put it mildly, any accomplished defence attorney would have moved for what is called an evidentiary hearing prior to any trial of Oswald on both these pieces of evidence. He would likely have any defence attorney competent would likely have had both of these pieces of evidence declared as inadmissible, the shells and the palm print. If not, he would have demonstrated to any jury that these pieces of evidence were worthless, since no chain of custody existed with either one, and beyond that, people were lying in order to create the illusion of a chain. So, just to briefly sum up, that's the palm print, Commission Exhibit 142, and the chain of custody of the shells allegedly found on the 6th floor. Thanks for putting up with me. Cheers.
And well done, you looked after the dog. I saw him chewing something, Johnny. I wasn't sure what.
Yeah, your pillows.
Toilet roll.
Johnny, just been talking to Stuart. Wasn't there an allegation by the undertakers that somebody that were looking after Oswald's body, that somebody came into the funeral parlour, and said we're FBI or we're wherever, and they went in to see the body.
Fingerprints.
And they didn't see him take the fingerprints, but that was the
fingers were covered in ink.
Okay.
Yeah. So the guy's name's Paul Grudy, and he claimed that when we were prepping Oswald's body for burial, agents came.
Yeah.
He said agents came, and they wanted to be left alone with the body. And he says they were in there, and when they left, when he went back in, over Lee Harvey Oswald's hands, and he had to scrape the ink off his hands in order for him to be buried. So yeah, he had been fingerprinted when he was lying there in his coffin.
Those fingerprints they took off Oswald, because I'm writing a really big article on the fingerprints. The fingerprints of Oswald are from the morgue. Are really identifiable because they are at UNT, the website, University of North Texas, and they are, when you make a fingerprint of someone's fingers, you make a rolling motion to make, and because you can't do that with a stiff, you can't do that with a dead person. So what they do is they tap it, left side, frontal, right side.
Okay.
You can see that their fingerprint card is at UNT, where you see that particular fingerprint card that was taken of it. Now the weird stuff is that that's a DPD fingerprint they took, whereas people thought it was Secret Service or FBI that actually went in there. I don't know. There were people in suits. I don't know who took the fingerprints, but that they did take fingerprints of him while he was dead. Well, after his death were taken, that's a given, yes, that's fact, definitely.
And Paul Grudy, actually, he was on the men who killed Kennedy, and he says it in his segment. He says he had to scrape the ink off Oswald's hands when he was lying in the coffin to prep for burial. So, yeah, pretty sad.
Yeah. Are there any other questions, guys? Hang on. I just lost. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you about the paper bag.
Yeah.
I think that I recall that they asked the man who had the machine that made the bags whether Oswald had been there on the 22nd to make a bag effectively, and he said no. But surely he must have made it at least the day before, because he allegedly brought it in on the morning of the 22nd. Did they ever actually ask this chap whether he'd made the bag previous to the 22nd?
Yeah, so the man you're talking about is Troy West. Troy West in his testimony was asked these questions. He was asked if he had ever observed Oswald around the station, if he ever observed Oswald in the act of making a bag. He was also asked if it was possible that the bag could be taken out of the machine and made elsewhere. And West said in his testimony that he knew who Oswald was. He never observed Oswald near his workstation, and he never witnessed Oswald engage in the act of making the bag, whether on the 21st or whenever. What makes this really interesting is that West was one of these type of guys that basically lived at his workstation. He ate lunch at his workstation. He never left to even watch the motorcade. So the only time he would have left for his workstation was maybe to go make coffee or go to the toilet or something like that. So he was basically there for his full shift. So if Oswald had indeed tried to make this bag, then he would have been observed. So that's why, as I stated in my articles, a presumption of innocence, that's why West is such an important witness. And that's why the paper bag itself is important, because not only have we got no witnesses that seen Oswald engage in making the bag, we've got no witnesses that see Oswald with the bag or materials to make a bag on the night of the 21st. The bag itself has no physical or scientific links to a broken down Mannlicher or Cano rifle. So the bag itself is wholly irrelevant to the assassination of President Kennedy. And these are the kind of questions a competent defence attorney would have got out or made known to the public if Oswald was permitted to stand trial. And this is why I, in my firm opinion, he was murdered, to stop a trial happening.
I have a
Great
question.
stuff. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I made a comment. I've never done that before, and I probably didn't do it right. But I was
well done. Nice one.
I was reading this book, Who in Dallas, by Albarelli, and anyway, in it he says that the gun was actually taken there as early as the 20th, and there would have been nothing for him to take in a bag on the 22nd, which would of course be why there is no evidence of it, that bag containing a rifle. And so that I don't know if you've run into that before, but it does make sense that the rifle was taken there earlier rather than that day.
I don't know when I don't know. I can't really comment on when I think the rifle was taken in. According to the Warren Commission, Oswald is supposed to have carried the broken down rifle on the morning of the 22nd. Remember, at the time of the assassination, there was a floor laying crew. They were relaying the floor on the 6th floor of the building. So if the weapon was there on the 20th, maybe the floor laying crew might have encountered it. I'm not sure, but I don't think Oswald ever carried anything into the depository that morning, bar his lunch, which he was seen eating by some witnesses. And during the assassination, he was in the lower floors of the building, if not outside. I'm not sure, but I know for a fact that he didn't transport any weapon into the building on the morning of the 22nd. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty confident about it because there's no evidence to suggest that he did. I mean, I've got a co-authored a book with a guy that's coming out very, very soon, if not this month, at very start of December, which goes into this all. I've got my articles on Kennedy and King called A Presumption of Innocence, Lee Harvey Oswald, Part 1, 2, and 3. And that, again, that just goes into the problems, piece by piece, all the problems with the physical evidence against Oswald in this case. And in my opinion, I don't think Oswald, I think if there was a competent defence attorney with all these problems, then I don't think Oswald would have been tried. But then again, I don't think he could have got a fair trial anywhere in the United States. I think there was too much fraudulent and prejudicial information coming out against him. But if he was to have a fair trial, there's no way he could have been found guilty, in my opinion.
Great, thanks a lot for that. And Johnny, thanks a million. That was terrific. I always find the chain of evidence interesting, and I always think, if it went to court, what would have happened? Surely there isn't any evidence. Any lawyer worth his salt would have been able to have defended the lack of chain of custody. Johnny, thanks so much. Wonderful for you to give up your time. Nice one.
I've got to go because Celtic are playing in 50 minutes. But I definitely got to write something for the Echo. I've got to do that. I've just been so busy this year with writing articles and this book going back and forth. But
please do. Please do, Johnny.
If anyone catches my presentation on Lancer, because I think that just happened. So speaking at two simultaneously at two different points. But yeah, thanks very much, guys.
Cheers, Johnny. Thanks a million, mate. Nice one. Thank you.
Okay. Oh well, then you got tough shit.
Video unavailable.
You're not getting in. Hold on. Yeah, I can't do that now. And because that hard drive won't connect, it's buggered. So
okay, hang on.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna mate, I'm not in the mood to yak for an hour. So.
Okay, hold on.
I've done so I'm gonna do a bit of a chat because we can't get these stupid videos to run. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the link through Tony later on when I get back. And there's two videos that they were shown at Lancer as well yesterday. So you can just watch it at your own convenience. They are very in the similar vein of the videos that are I have posted. I think 6 or 7 videos as such, and I made a couple of videos with Malcolm, one in end of September and one in 4 or 5 days ago on Tuesday when I met Malcolm, and we did another video, and I thought, you know what, we need another 20 minutes on top from what we've been doing as such. And I was just basically going to talk about the archives. I'm going to publish the link either tomorrow or Monday at the latest about the archives. And basically I would start, I've been in this channel for us. I've mentioned the archives quite a few times, but not really done a story as such. So I'll just give you a really good outline of it right now. So it started, I met Malcolm in 2016 at Canterbury in a seminar, and I made contact and I did an interview. This interview is on YouTube. It's just Google Malcolm Blunt Canterbury seminar, and it's in 3 parts, like 25 minutes, and I met Malcolm then at that particular seminar in Canterbury, and we stayed in touch. And Malcolm would send me an envelope with some documents here and there, but they were all over the place. And just before that, in that Canterbury seminar, I was given a USB stick by Tony Basing, and on that USB stick there was a lot of stuff from the CIA on Yuri Nosenko, the Russian defector, and there was one document in there that was of interest to me. That was a CIA document where the CIA had basically put a graph together where they put all the statements of the Texas School Book Depository employees to explain where they were and what they did at that time as such. So from there on, I was getting packages with paperwork from Malcolm, because he came across something and said, this will interest you, or he'd say, look, such and such would really like these documents. Can you scan them in and send them to him? So I said, that's fine. So in between, in that period, him and I talked, and I said, you know what, we need to do something more. And he said, well, if you can, I'd like to have some cassette tapes that I've got. I'd like to have them digitized. I said, all right, yeah, I'm up for that. So what's supposed to be a handful of cassettes, basically, exactly. We're about 250 to 350. I don't know the exact number, I didn't count them, but it was that many cassette tapes. And I digitized all these. It's relatively easy. You just buy a Walkman type of thing. You're all old enough to basically know what a Walkman is. God forbid you're all 18-year-olds. I did digitize all those, and they were mostly from Harry Livingston, because he purchased part of his archive, and that was the original premise of the job. That he said, you know, can you digitize this stuff? And I said, yeah, I'll take care of that. Yeah, but it's Harry's stuff, and I might just throw in a few more tapes from me. And I said, yeah, that's fine. It's not a problem, because it's just a matter of press and play and record with some software, and then after that, chop the beginning and the end, make it neat, turn it into an MP3 or a WAV file, job done. So I did that, and I started with doing Harry Livingston's files, and Harry's files were pretty good and pretty well organized because they were on a name basis. So if you're talking about Dr. Berkeley, it was that thick, that folder, and you know, everything on Dr. Berkeley was in that folder as such. And some of you probably already know that Harry Livingston was very deep into investigating the autopsy with a few fellow other researchers, and he made he did some good work, especially the first high treason and the second high treason. I think the first one was a bestseller, and that meant that I just started scanning this stuff in early December 2018 till early Feb 2019, because Malcolm had put me in the front of the room in a building, and he said, you sit here and I'll sit in the back. And I said, okay, because what happened was that I was going there, which is about anything between 8 and 10 hours travel with a bus and the metro and the tube, and I had to travel from Malcolm's place to a place called Tetbury, which is in a really little picturesque little town, absolutely beautiful. And he had like a property, an investment property in the main shopping street there, and I would go there with Malcolm, load up a load of stuff, and then leave. But I had about 2.5, 3 hours time during that day while I was there, and I brought it back and I would work on it as such. That, of course, proved to be a difficult job because I spent too much time on traveling and too little time on getting the stuff together. So I said, Malcolm, I need more time. And he says, okay. So we stayed in a B&B right next door, 4 doors down in a pub, really nice pub, by the way. And so I would pick stuff up, put it all together, and in the meantime, I would scan stuff in the meantime. If I had time left, I would scan stuff in. So I found out that the best way to scan this stuff in is with an iPhone, believe it or not, because it's incredibly rapid, and it's once you've named the file, you could basically just send it through email or say in Google Drive. At that point, I decided to use Google Drive because you get a fair bit amount of storage with your Gmail address. But I bought extra storage because I thought, this is getting way too much, blah, blah, blah. So we would have like 3-day sessions, like Tuesday up to including Thursday. And I would just sit there and I'd go through all this stuff. And then one night, Malcolm does like a 9-to-5 thing, but I don't. I was here till 11 o'clock at night. So, and he called me a masochist. So I'm out there, and all of a sudden one night I go into the back and I sit on this sofa he had over there, and I pick up the folder and I found Will Fritz's AGCA contact report, interview, you name it. And I said, Malcolm, I've never seen this. And he said, oh, well, you know. And I said, you know what I need to do? And I started picking up all these FBI files. And all of them, what I looked at was like, that's interesting. I can use that. Yeah, that I should take this with me. And this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. So the next morning I said to Malcolm, I need to fess up. And he goes, what have you done? I said, I went through your files. I need to do your files as well. And he goes, do you know what you're going to do? And I'm like, well, I'll try and get as much done as possible. Because the problem was, there was only a deadline of 6 months. And in that 6 months, the only objective was get as much done as possible. Doesn't matter, just scan it in, get it done, get it all as much as possible. So I worked my nut off the first half of 2019 because the property was being sold and the exchange was end of May, if I'm not mistaken, and in June it was supposed to be sent to the States. That didn't happen because I'll tell you that later. So, and every day while I was there, if I'd leave from Malcolm's place back like 45 minutes again. But I would go upstairs in his house, and he called it the lighthouse because it was a very bright room in the top of his where he lives. And he'd go, I've got this, I've got that, I've got this, I've got that, I've got that. Now, I already maxed out when I left Tetbury, so I come to his house and he piles it on top of it, and I go, I don't know how to take this with me, it's too much. So I got Malcolm's transatlantic suitcase, and that could hold 3 big shopping bags. In England, it's like the bag for life type of thing. So 3 of them, and I just filled it up. It was so heavy that even the bus driver and the cab driver asked me, like, have you got a corpse in here, mate? Because it's so heavy and, you know, it's just ridiculous. And me and the cab driver had to lift it up together. And even with the 2 of us, I was like, my God, this is really heavy. And Malcolm stands there deadpan and goes, paper's heavy. So then that material all disappeared into a storage space. And so that's like June 2019. And then I was just basically from June 2019 until the end of 2020, in December last year, I basically just did Malcolm's materials. So his working papers and so forth. But there was plenty of stuff that was Dallas related for me. And there's a lot of spook stuff as well. Because I said, like, if it's all going to be spook stuff, I'm not going to be interested because, you know, it's too much. He says no, because what basically proved it to be was that it was a mixture of everything. See, the thing is, Malcolm's archive, to most people, and to me, isn't very organized. Just imagine you have somebody with a forklift, and you lift up all the boxes and files and God knows whatever, and then all of a sudden just tip it over, and it tosses on the floor. Then you put it back together, and you pretty much got an idea what Malcolm's archive looks like. So it's taken me at least a year and a half, probably more, 20 months I'd say, to figure out what's what and how it is. So besides emailing PDFs to Malcolm and say, my God, what the hell is this? Because there were names that I'd never heard of. Because my focus is Oswald, the last 48 hours basically, and other than that I'm not interested in anything. I'll read it or I hear about it, but I'm not digging into it. That's the difference. I was digging into all the Prayer Man and the DPD and the FBI and Dallas stuff. And what I found in Malcolm's archive is there's just such a huge of material in that. So I said, I will scan your stuff in, and you know, because when I come across something, that's for me, and you know, all the other stuff is for others. So slowly, I started to put a Windows folder system together. Just pretend you're in My Documents. You have a folder, row of folders, and these folders have subfolders. So, which, say for instance, if I have a Garrison folder, well, there's a folder with FBI documents, and a folder with CIA documents, a folder with, you know, and so forth. So they have subfolders inside. And that slowly started to build up, and I started to check riff numbers, and then I found out about June, July last year, that a lot of the riff numbers aren't online. And what I mean by that is I can't see the document online. The riff number may be part of the Federal Register,
or not at all. You know, sometimes there's absolutely no trace of anything. The only thing you have with the RIF number. Now the RIF number is, in case you don't know, is a 13-digit number, three digits hyphen 5 digits hyphen 5 digits. And so that makes searching on the internet relatively easy, because you always end up at Mary Farrell, or you go to the Black Vault, or you go to the archives of the National Archives as such. Now, before I go into that, I've got a really sneaky suspicion, and I'm not sure about this, that the files that were released in the 90s haven't been digitized. And that's probably the cause why Malcolm has so many files that aren't online as such. So that makes his archive quite interesting. At this point, I've done about 150,000 pages and about, I'm guessing, between 12 and 14,000 PDFs. And I categorized all these. Now, the searching is as simple as going through a Windows archive. You go to the top right and you put a name in, and of course Windows starts looking for it. The materials are stored on Google Drive, and that's really good, because first of all, the OCR, the object character recognition, works pretty damn good on it. It also allows you to look for RIF numbers if the document is in a pretty good state, because the problem is with quite a few JFK assassination documents is that the quality of the copy isn't 100%. So I have to rely on that, on a good, decent quality document. You know, for instance, the ARB documents, they're all done by computer. Whereas if you look at the documents from the FBI, from the 62, 3, 4, 5, whatever, they've got lots of stamps on them, there's lots of scribbles on them, annotations and so forth. For that you need an upgrade in the OCR, you probably need artificial intelligence to find out. Malcolm taught me what J. Edgar Hoover's signature looks like and his writing as such, for instance. So, you know, in the future I'm going to try and hope to implement artificial intelligence of some sort that basically sees all these things and brings a different correlation to the table for people to find documents that are, besides names, are also related to. Are you messing with me?
No, go
yeah,
ahead.
you are.
Keep going.
And so that basically means that that the search may be even more refined than it already is. This is a work in progress because, first of all, I started out by getting as much done as possible, and this has been the thing that's always been hanging over my head. Get as much done as possible because the stuff is going away, blah 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 blah. So, and Malcolm changed his mind a couple of times as well. So it was just, I didn't know what to do. I just thought, you know what, I'm just gonna scan, put it all together, and you know, I'll worry about it later. So what do you got in this archive? Well, I'd say it touches almost every angle of the JFK assassination. It is probably one of the better and complete from a subject point of view. So if you want to know about Cuba, anti-Castro, you're in the right place. You want to know about Garrison, Clay Shaw, and anything related in New Orleans, that archive is your place. If you want to know about the Central Intelligence Agency and the people that were working on it as such, because that's what Malcolm has been doing for years on end, then you have found the right place, and so on. Secret Service, some of the reports are absolutely amazing to read. I basically am of the opinion that it is the best book on the JFK assassination that's around as such. And of course, Malcolm has, practically since day one, been working together with a lot of researchers in the game as such. I can just come up with a whole list, this, that, and the other. But you know that he worked with John Armstrong at Harvey and Lee. Then he worked, he's been working with John Armstrong, what's his name, in Miami regarding the Cuba thing. His name is just Gordon Winslow. you worked with him. What I didn't even know until about 6 months into scanning all this was that Malcolm had done 3-4 years of research regarding anti-Castro Cubans and so forth. I then basically just kept going back and forth, and I said, you know what, this is all taking too much time and I'm not getting enough done. I need a car. I don't drive, so I had, first of all, Tony Basing pick me up twice. I would go to my boss, and Malcolm picked me up, sleep there 2 nights, and I'd come back with 9-10 bags. And after that, Peter Antle helped me. And Peter has done probably 15 to 20 trips with me in the last 2 years. We were there last Tuesday, as I mentioned earlier, and we just took bags. I think the biggest load that we ever done is 27 bags. And it's just tons of paper. And it's going to go on for another year, at least. And there's a lot of spook stuff coming. I really learned about all that. Names that I never heard of. Bill Sturbitz, for instance. Never heard of this guy. I learned of certain correspondence between people, say G. Robert Blakey of the HSCA to these names are Scott Breckenridge of the Central Intelligence Agency. And it's just going back and forth, stuff like that. The ARB material, for instance, wonderful. HSCA, wonderful. That's absolutely beautiful stuff that's in there. And there's tons to read. Now, I don't have a way of showing you how to do it, but you just have to think about, I've got a load of folders in a row, and I'm going to do a search. Then you can basically just fill in the name in the search box, and it will basically find that name in every document that's on the site. You take it easy, mate. Yeah. And so that, and some of these searches, even when you think like, there'll be about 20 documents. No way. And don't be bright and say, I'm going to search Oswald, because then you're in trouble. I'm telling you, thousands of documents. I'm not kidding. Absolutely loads. Marina Oswald, same thing. Marguerite, the feds as well. There's just so much material that will keep you busy. I mean, if you don't have the fear of going into a record. I'm losing my words. I'm losing the plot.
I'm just going to launch a web browser here. Keep talking.
Okay, so
get the website up, I can share this.
These documents are all on name base. I put them together. If the riff sheet is present, that's included, of course. And the material, it's just going to take you a long time. Jack Ruby as well, tons of stuff. I mean, whatever you name, there's a lot of stuff there. That's just the way it goes. And the old stuff, because what it was that what was happening in Tetbury was that was mostly of Malcolm's old research, anything from the mid-90s till the early 2000s. So a lot of FBI, a lot of Cuba, a lot of Oswald this, Oswald that. And then a system started to evolve. Like I said earlier, that took like 18 months, 20 months before it finally started to manifest itself. And other than that, I had those tapes, and then of course videotapes. Harry Livingston had a ton of VHS tapes, but and Malcolm also had quite a few VHS tapes as well. Well, those are already online. If you look at the Lone Gunman channel, where I post always our talks, presentations, there are also a lot of conference talks from Ask in the early 90s and Copa, John Judge. So like in October, I think I added about 60 videos of Copa, and before that I did about, 200 other videos and so forth. So this all gets released, or was already released to an extent, and some people have seen a fair amount of paper, but it was less organized, and also I only showed about a dozen folders. Whereas now you got about 30 odd, and it's subfolders as such. It's a lot of work, but whatever your specialty is, whatever your interest is, you're gonna end up reading and finding a lot of stuff, but more like details that fill the gaps. I mean, that's my experience with the material that I was looking for. A lot of the time something was said, but it could never be proven, or there was evidence that supported that as such. And now you have a lot of stuff, because I mean, I've got 4 bags in my room with stuff that I held behind because I was like, that's all useful for my research just by itself. And that's something I started to do about I don't know, a year and a half ago. And that after this weekend I'm going to start working with, because I'm taking a huge break from everything related, and I'm just going to work on my own stuff for that period of time. And yeah, it's just for the company DPUK, I think it's a brilliant asset. We are no, those pages are locked. I didn't do that. So and it will be, if you're interested, you're gonna have a great time, and you'll find a lot of stuff you go, I never thought that was in there, and you know, and so forth. So yeah, it's just the material that you don't read in the book about, or you do read in the book about, but you can't find it online as such. That's how I would look at it. Yeah, I've helped many researchers with material. Jim Eugenio, Joe Beck's got a load of stuff. Alan Dale, John Newman, Larry Hancock. You know, they just said, well, have you got anything on William King Harvey? And of course I do. So that all gets shared right away. And my objective was to throw it into the masses. Everybody get access to it in a very simplistic way. Just straightforward. I'm looking for this. Do you have anything? Yes. Here you go. Boom. Get out of my house. Go away. So that is basically what I aimed at, and I've been doing as such, and since October 2018. So yeah, good 3 years, and yeah, that's roughly it. I've now been doing videos of Malcolm. Those that have been on Facebook. Have seen some of these videos. I will put these videos on our website as well next week or the week after. And also on these videos, I'm going to take a break till Jan or Feb, or my next trip to Malcolm. I've done about 6 or 7 over the last 4 months. I did about one every 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and they explain bits about the archive, how it got put together, where you can go, what you can do, and so forth. You see, Malcolm just didn't go to the National Archives. He went to archives in New Orleans. He went to archives in Tennessee, Washington, a couple or 3 even, and so forth. Miami as well. So there's stuff from different, at least half a dozen different archives. Now, of course, the majority is from NARA in Washington, and they're the ones that have riff sheets, whereas the other ones don't have riff sheets. There's bits from Gus Russo's archive in there as well. Very interesting material, and yeah, it's just going to keep you busy. And I think, yeah, I've had fun because I was forced to keep seated as much as possible. And I was like, well, what am I going to do in all that period of time? And I thought, well, I'm going to do this. And also because I saw how valuable this archive is. Not just for the fact that it has material that's not online, but because of its width and the amount of it. I mean, I never thought I was going to get this far. And it's now been decided that I'm just going to finish the whole archive. And so, yeah, that's going to take at least another year. The problem I have is that, which I'm really happy about, is that in the beginning I would just say, De Morenschild 1, De Morenschild 2, Marguerite Oswald 1 to 25, blah, blah, blah. Yet now, it's like, well, you need to rename that because there's absolutely nothing happening, you know, unless of course somebody's a De Morenschild, has an interest in De Morenschild and says, I'll just take the whole load. You can do that. You can right click on a folder and say download. It will zip it up and it will enable you to download the entire folder. Be careful. Some of these folders are massive, and we're talking gigabytes. I've used up 90% of my 100 gigs allowance of files on that drive as such. So I'm gonna have to buy new space in a month or two, extra space, because it's just more and more coming. And what can I say? It's just a big thing. I will put in the email that Tony sends to everyone. I'm gonna send the 2 links to the videos for everyone to look at, and me and Malcolm talking, besides the other 6 or 7 videos that I did with Malcolm. The Livingston stuff, part of it has been released. The audio has also partly been released. I'm gonna probably work on my 4 papers that are gonna be released probably at the end of Q1 next year. And then after that, I'm probably gonna delve into the autopsy photos with William Law together. And we might write a book about this whole thing, because I managed to find documentation that nobody else has. So we've got that, and the same goes with my papers. So with my second Volonus encounter paper, only a few tidbits, but the interrogations paper, let's just say that it was 300 and odd pages long a year and a bit ago, and I've added at least 10% more, 30 odd pages to it as such. There might be some other bits, but I am thinking of shrinking it down a bit and just link to things instead of putting them, put all the documentation directly there. I'll do it in what's really pivotal and important as such. In those papers, and then paper 3 and 4, the TSBD and Prayer Man will come out as well, and from there on probably the medical stuff, because some of the medical stuff is fantastic, especially with like the chain of how the evidence basically ended up at NARA, through Robert Kennedy, through Thomas Kelly of the Secret Service, through Evelyn Lincoln as well. Did you know, some people don't know this, but that they had to whack with the butt of the gun to take one of the coffin handles off of the side of the coffin, because they couldn't make that turn with the coffin inside the plane because the entrance was too slim. And that coffin handle was in Evelyn Lincoln's possession as such. I'd say that that would make quite a bit of money on the market if that were available as such. But so this is really interesting, and of course this all takes a lot of time to deal with, and sporadically there'll be an update to things, and I want everybody to look through this and find things, and don't be scared. That's the thing. A lot of people are a bit wary of digging into the documents as such and having to look for stuff, but don't. Just take your time and you'll find the bits that you really want to know about. And I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to do this and give this to everyone, because it's really important, and especially now this whole Biden thing, who just waggled off with his tail between his legs like anyone else would. Let's not forget that. Little pussy out. And so it's a good replacement archive for the time being to go through, to plow through, to read. And I hope everyone has fun. And I also hope you have fun reading watching the videos on YouTube as such. Keep an eye on that channel, because there's going to be quite a few more chats with Malcolm. And so every time I go there now, there's going to be an hour's interview at least just quacking about stuff. I do it totally unprepared, because I can't be asked. I'm too busy with scanning, so I just don't prepare anything, and I let Malcolm do the talking, and you'll see that in tape 5, 6, and 7. Now one day I'll ask him some strong questions and get through it as such. I've got material I held back because it's too good to share, and I want to do it. And I'm going to do something on the fingerprints, and just the fingerprints from the DPD. And if you pardon my language, it's the biggest clusterfuck of all time. So that's one. Then Malcolm worked in the late 90s on the Dallas police evidence. I think you have, Joe, as well. And between the reproduction of the evidence, the photographs as such, there's about, I don't know, the evidence itself, I'd say 8 inches of paper, you know, because they even took, Malcolm got scans from every, so what I'm talking about is that there's photographic reproductions they made with a recorder camera. It's an idiot-proof camera. It's on a stand. All you do is press click and wind to the next frame and press click again. It's absolutely idiot-proof. But yet they managed to, at the top of my head, unless you correct me, Joe, it's about 50 odd or 80 odd images, isn't it, that were basically, that were gone, that disappeared. The numbering doesn't match between the DPD and the FBI as such. And the worst part is that Malcolm went through it back then in 99 and he wrote an article of which there's a few drafts, but in the end he said, I've got 6 scenarios regarding this because he just couldn't nail it down as such. So I thought, oh, I want to give this a go. So I will, but it's going to be later next year by the time. Fingerprints, the evidence, the autopsy stuff, and probably 1 or 2 more. But yeah, it's just mega interesting, and I'm going to miss it at some point because it's like crack. I'm not kidding. The amount of information you just get thrown at you, there's no book that can match this. That's the beauty of the whole thing. So that doesn't mean like, oh, everybody read 150,000 pages. Because what I did was this, I glance at the paperwork and go, oh, right, CIA, la 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 la. Doesn't really bother me, blah blah blah. But when I look through the Dallas stuff, I've got my antennas. I've got more antennas coming out of my head, looking at the stuff and saying, ah, right, okay. And obviously, what's really important from this archive is that you need to learn that a lot of evidence is missing, a lot of evidence has been destroyed, or cannot be found, and so forth. Now, Malcolm can just sit here for 4 or 5 hours and just talk about that. And this is what people need to pick up from, because there are finder's aids that point to records. And again, Joel will know more about this than I do, but there's just basically a ton of stuff that hasn't been looked at, investigated, or has come out as such. And Malcolm is pretty damn good on that, because he knows it from whether it's the Secret Service or the ARB or the HSCA and so forth. And he also says like, oh, from the Warren Commission such and such has disappeared, and but also at the same time some guy was there and he was like a bloodhound guarding these files and so forth. Personally, I find the drafts of the Warren report, the chapters, because Malcolm managed to copy a lot of stuff that has annotations from Warren Commission members on it as such. Never say idiot proof and dealing with the Dallas police, yeah. Well, the camera was, but apparently not. So yeah, I hope everyone has fun, and like I said, I will send those links to those videos later on in, I don't know, 3-4 hours. I'll send them to you. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm just gonna look at the, can you scroll up at the questions and the remarks? Yeah, all right. Record and visual, yeah. Thank you, Ryan. Yes. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Richard, again. Okay. So if you have any questions, I'll see if I can answer them. The main link either will be coming out tomorrow or Monday. Monday's the 22nd, so it's possible it becomes Monday. And also, I still got to build the web page because I locked it, but I haven't had time yet to do it because I did a talk yesterday. I did the movies yesterday. The week before that, I was on a podcast, And the week before that, I was at Project JFK. That video is online. That was posted in Facebook. Excuse me. So yeah, lots going on, and more coming. So that's my job cut out. That's my work cut out for me for the next year. Also, stop hogging the screen, will you?
Mind?
Yeah.
I'm trying to
You just want to be
bam,
big. You just want to be there. Look at me. So anyway, anything?
But I was going to ask, one of the things that when we first started talking about the archive.
About who?
When we first started talking about the archive, about the fact you were going to put some stuff on the Dealey Plaza UK site, and my idea was we would put it behind. It was for the members of the society.
Yeah.
But you were quite adamant
Yeah.
that the research and the scanning that you were going to do and the papers that you were going to scan was going to be available to everybody.
Yeah, because the thing is, Malcolm's collection is unique. I mean, it's 25 years of gathering, almost 25 years. I think the last one that Malcolm did was 2018, 2019. And he started in the mid-90s. And I don't know whether it was because of, no, he did that before he started to collaborate with Armstrong. And I thought it was important. I just thought, you know what, there's no way, because what I was looking for was in between all the other stuff. So regardless, I had to go through all the stuff that was there to find the stuff that I was after. So then at that point I went, well, you can do two things. You can be a real selfish twat, or you can just say, you know what, I'm gonna bang it all in, and that's what I did. So because of the system that I've got, I built a system with my iPhone because it allowed me to title the document quick and send it, email, and to Google Drive. And then basically I would have, because from the email I downloaded, I'd have 3 copies available as such, because I was like, I ain't gonna lose anything. Nothing whatsoever. And 3 years ago, the scanning software wasn't that reliable. You know, I've had quite a few times that I scanned 80, 150 pages, and then all of a sudden, whoop, the damn app crashed. You should have heard me then after that. Very charming, incredibly sexy sounds, I tell you. So it was just really full on, and you know, and then just frustrating at first, and then after that I was like, well, I put so much effort in it, I don't want to lose this. So I built a system for me to do it the quickest way, and also less risky way as such, for the stuff basically to be stored and available as such, because that's what I did with Facebook. With Facebook, the links that I post have been uploaded 30 seconds to a minute before it goes to the drive. So I've got Google Drive on my iPhone, and I just click on the Google Drive and grab the link and paste that into the Facebook group. I've posted once in a while in the other groups, but that's too much work. So I just said, Dealey Plaza UK is the only one that's going to get all the files, and makes Dealey Plaza UK at this point a unique club with something unique to offer. For me, you know, when you compare to other groups that are around, ARC, Lancer, Project JFK, and a few more, I thought this will make us look good. So I thought that's a great thing to do. I'm the webmaster anyway, so I've got the control. So I thought, you know what, just do it. And the problem was that, I mean, I've had, for those that don't know, I've had 16 operations in the last 4 years. So on average, that's 1 per quarter. So, and all they tell me, sit, don't stand, sit. So what am I gonna do? Well, do that. So, and that's what I did. Anyway.
Is that what Malcolm Blunt wanted as well, Bart? For the scanning, his research, his material to be made available to everybody. Is that what he wanted as well?
Yeah. Yeah, no, because Malcolm basically always had paper on him. So, you know, when he met us in Canterbury, he always had a little carrier bag and an envelope with some documents in it. And every time I said, Malcolm, it's not enough, need more. So you know, and that's how slowly the whole debate went from why don't I come over and why don't I do some stuff, and then the sale of that property was on, and it's like, well, you got 6 months to grab whatever you can. So I did, and you know, it's always based on speed. And then slowly, you know, I didn't even know. I wouldn't say I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I got into because there were so many subjects and sub-subjects as such. So, you know, and the only thing that basically slowed me down was lockdown with COVID. So last winter, for instance, Feb was a slow month. And last year I had a period that Malcolm just went, I think from Feb till end of June, I didn't do anything because, well, a few here and there, because Malcolm didn't want to see anyone. And he just went, listen, you know, because at that point he was a bit fragile. And he just went, listen, stay away, don't come. And I said, okay. So then we went in June and we just cracked on. I cracked on from late June till end of the year, practically full time. In November, I had a burnout because I was just sick to death of all the spook stuff. All I had were bags talking about the agency. And I was like, come on, go away, man. It's like, you know, it was more like, I can't find a document in that whole period that was for me, you know, so I was just doing it for everybody else. And then at some point, it's like, come on, let me have something. So the next month in December, all of a sudden, see, this is another thing. It was supposed to be sent to the States, the material from Tetbury, and that meant that I just did all that stuff. And in December, when he said, "Oh, it's in the warehouse," and I said, "Why is that? Why hasn't it gone to the States yet? It was supposed to go 18 months ago." And he went, "Well, I waited, and then COVID kicked off, and that kept it all locked up because they wouldn't allow anyone in there." So in mid-December last year, they allowed access. So I went in there, and it was just that period of time where Boris had sorted the shopping charade out, basically by letting people to go shopping in December for a week or 10 days before lockdown turned back on in after Christmas or so, whenever that was. So that's when Peter Antolin went straight into that. I said, I need to go there, I need to finish this. And that took me, well, I've got about a bag, but I've slowed down. So yeah, it just took 9 months. Thank you. So you're mad. You are mad.
What the hell? There's 2.5
pints.
What the hell?
For fuck's sake. Anyway, so yeah,
I didn't know you had those two. Right, okay.
So that's all I can say right now. There's an article in Garrison, 10 pages, which I wrote in June, July, and I gave that to S.C. Patrick, and he made a really nice 10-page spread out of it. I took pictures, of course, of Malcolm while we were doing it. I made pictures of the archives, the chests of drawers, you know, things like that. So that's all in there, and there probably some of them will end up on the web page. And yeah, I hope everyone has fun with this stuff. And who knows? We're probably going to do someone else's archive after that, or you know, something. I mean, I'm having way too much fun doing this. But first my own work, and then after that we'll see what I can do, and pump the archives for DPUK more and more and more. Now other people are working on this as well. Project JFK is working on G. Gary Shaw's material, which I really like, of course. And there are 2 others that are working on stuff. The ARC is working on some stuff together in conjunction with Rex Bradford of Mary Farrell. And someone else, whose name I will not divulge, is working on something very important as well, that probably a lot of people would say, I wouldn't mind having a delve into that. So I don't know what the status of that is, but I know that there is there are individuals or small groups that are after this stuff and trying to catch. And this is what we as a community need to work on, because everyone profits from this, and that's digitizing. And I know it's boring, and I know it's a lot of work. I can attest to that. But it's important that this is made available and that you people can find. Because I tell you what, anyone who wants to write an article, it will complete your story a lot more than just getting it from books and forums. The documents will help you. Because what people mention in a document, say they refer to a document, they only refer to a specific passage. They don't refer. They put the document name or number in the index underneath the article, but you don't know what else is in that document unless you get that document in your hand as such. You might have a complete different angle on the whole thing because you're reading. You go, oh right, but there's this as well. Oh right, but I didn't know that. That's what you get as well. So, for if you get fed up with books, this is the place you go to, and basically add additional information and find additional information as such. So anyway, what else has been written? Yeah, that too. What kind of beer? Yeah, it's Peroni. So yeah, that's it. Any questions? Come on, hit me. Something difficult. Come on. No? Go on, Joe. Hit me.
Do you scan it one sheet at a time, or do you sheet feeding scan?
Well, the documents, most of them are stapled. So the first thing I do is take the staple out, and then I just go sheet by sheet. But the thing is that 2.5 years ago, for instance, he gave me a bag that was just Marina Oswald. There were 25 folders in it, and it's just Marina Oswald. And I gave the bag to Peter Entel, and I said, "Can you scan this?" And he said, "How?" I said, "Just do it by folder, and just name the files Marina 1, Marina 2, and I will look into that and see." And so forth. The problem is when you have files that are called either sort or working, because those are the things that Malcolm's working on, and then you're talking about 30 sheets, incomplete stuff, and I have to read that sheet and then put the names of the people that are mentioned and the organization as such. Because this is another thing. What was really hard for me, and I spoke to Malcolm about it, and even Malcolm shrugged his shoulders. When I went, when are you, when is it Schweiker, and when is it church committee? Yeah, when is that, Joe? What's the difference? Because they do lap over each other.
Yeah, I think Schweiker was first, and then church.
Right. But how do you see that on the riff sheet?
I'd have to see the riff sheets.
No, but I mean, the numbers are identical, aren't they? And they also start with SSC. That's another thing. They're always called SSC.
Senate Select Committee on Intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they start with 15. I think they start with 157.
Right. That's correct. Yeah. But and this is a thing for those that don't know. There's a lot of church files missing. But what Malcolm managed to get hold of, if you want to read about the agency and the people involved and all that, then that is great stuff in church, and also Rockefeller Commission. So that's another thing. Every commission that did stuff on the Kennedy assassination is in that archive. Abzug, Bella Abzug, that's a German name. It's A-B-Z-U-G-Z. A-B-Z-U-G. Abzug. Abzug is something like retreating or just going back. I mean, but she was a really feisty lady, and HSCA does loads. There's absolutely tons of stuff. Dallas itself as well. There's tons of stuff. There's stuff from Dallas for the municipal archives I haven't seen at UNT or at the municipal archives as such. So there's loads of stuff that isn't online as such, but now it is. So the rarity has been shaved off. Basically, it's now publicly available. So I hope that for those that are interested in documentation as such, so I hope that takes care of this miserable period of not getting the files released as such.
If you're interested in the Dallas City Archives records, just Google Portal to Texas History. You should see a lot of it there.
Yeah, this at UNT, that's called University of North Texas. If you go to the UNT site, all that stuff went over there. They all put it in there as such. So, and on top of that, I know that the UNT site as well has got movie material from like Dallas police arresting people in, say, 1959. So you see Laval or you see Fritz in 1940. All these really odd and rare footage of such, of these fucking gangsters basically being arrested, but also being arrested by gangsters. So don't get me wrong on this. So it's really, that's interesting. So it's good stuff. So
great stuff.
And now I'm bored, so go away.
But that's great. I mean, considering that that was off the top of your head for the last hour and a quarter, that's been awesome.
And I wasn't in the mood.
You weren't in the mood. You weren't in the mood. Do you know what though? It's amazing. Couple of beers and he gets him in the mood.
Yeah.
Now we know.
And another Peroni.
Hey, I'm as corrupt as Wolf Fritz, okay? So, you know what? Don't worry about it. Yeah.
All right, another Peroni. He's ready to go.
Yeah. So, Anyway, if anyone else has questions, tomorrow or Monday, you can all read the page and a little bit of stuff behind it and so forth. Plow through it, and find out things. That's what it's all about.
So, Bart, tomorrow I will send an email around to everybody with the link to those two videos.
Either tomorrow or Monday, yeah.
Yeah, tomorrow. You let me know when it's ready to go, and I'll email that around.
Okay.
And I think we'll finish the day off. We'll finish the day off there, everybody. I mean, thank you, Barty. Thanks, Stuart, and all the speakers.
Does anyone want to talk about something? A little water cooler talk, or are we all?
Yeah, we're pretty much that.
Yeah. All right.
No, I'm happy to take any questions.
Anything.
Okay. And you guys see the stone thing over there?
Yeah.
I'm going to stop recording, and maybe that'll encourage people to ask questions.
Okay.